All right, hello, Forgers, and welcome to Metasight, a podcast where we discuss SolForge Fusion mechanics, meta, and maneuvers. I'm your host, Ben, also known as Onk, and joining me today we have the world champion himself, Sam Nathanson. How's it going?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm glad
Thank
you
you so much
could.
for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We're going to be continuing our four-part series on the factions for Battle for Whitefang Pass today, and today we're going to talk about Uterra.
Awesome. I'm so
Uh,
excited.
yeah. There's a lot of fun stuff that happened in Uterra and Battle for Whitefang Pass, so I'm excited to talk
Oh
about.
yeah.
And we're gonna start off with a bang. You guys will see. But before we get into talking about the cards, I just want to kind of go over how these episodes work if you haven't seen the previous ones. So we're gonna go through every card, all the holistic and non-forged creatures, the forged creatures, all the modifiers, and the spells and soulbinds. And when we talk about this, we want to kind of take it into account a little bit objectively in some cases in terms of like how the stats are assigned. That'll help us kind of get an understanding of the power level of the card and like how strong the developers thought the abilities are based on how much of a stat penalty or bonus that they're giving the card. Our baseline for this is the combat tactician. So at level 1 it has a 12-point stat allocation. At level 2 you get an 18-point stat allocation, and at level 3 you get a 27-point stat allocation. So that gives us kind of a baseline of at level 1, 2, and 3 kind of how much attack and health you should expect the creature to have. If you have much less than that, you're probably getting a very strong ability with it. If you have more than that, then you're probably taking some sort of hit in order to get that extra bonus. So yeah, without further ado, let's go right into Uterra. And we're going to start off with the big, the bad, the Arborist.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So do you want to take
This-
take this one, Sam?
yeah. So Arboris. It's a 4/4 at level 1. It's a dragon, which is really exciting. It's
Yeah.
got breakthrough and it has deploy. If you have more than 50 health at level 1, you give it +3/+3. So this is a card that has a -4 stat buff. But at the same time, you get a lot of really strong abilities on this that really make it worth that negative stat buff. Because not only do you get breakthrough, but
Mm.
if you have more than 50 life, you kind of overcome that negative stat bonus, and you're getting +6 total when you give the +3/+3. So it gives it a good way to actually get you ahead. And in green, there's a lot of life gain. So
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a really strong card that at level 1, it's definitely worth playing. Like, it's a card that I love to have in my hand.
Yeah. And let's look at the progression of it as well. So we've
Oh,
got
for sure.
at level 1 we got that 4/4, and then at level 2, if you can keep that 50
Yeah.
point or 50 health above 50 health by cycle 2, you're gonna get an overall of 12/12. But the real like haymaker is that if you can stay above 50 by cycle 3, you get a 100/100 Arborist.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Well, when I saw this card the first time, I read the level 1. I'm like, that's cool. I love the level 2. I was like, that's pretty cool. I saw the level 3, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So I think this is a really cool card, and it's just one of those things where that stat buff at the top level is insane.
Yeah, it's definitely a very big carrot, right? Like it's like you gotta totally alter your play style in order to make sure that by cycle 3 you're getting that massive bonus. But even if you don't hit it, it's above curve by by cycle 3. A 15/15 breakthrough is still, without any sort of penalty, is still a pretty decent creature if even if you can't hit the bonus.
Yeah,
Um,
because it's +3 with breakthrough, just right
yeah,
off the bat as a vanilla creature. So it's like having that extra buff is pretty incredible if you can get there.
yeah. So what has been your experience with this card? Because I've not had a decent enough deck to really play with it. I've you have a large collection, so I'm sure you have plenty of ways to supplement the life gain. But have you had a lot of experience with Arborist?
So I've played it a little bit. I've actually not played it as much as I would have hoped for, but
Hmm.
I actually do have a Betrayer Arboris, and that's the deck that I've kind of played the most with it,
Okay.
because I basically have it in Necrom. So it's like basically pairing it with a Uterra list. It's kind of where I've kind of found the home. But in general, every time I've seen it played, it's played with Uterra Necrom for the sake of those two factions together give you that life gain bonus. I personally have never seen it become 100/100, but I've seen the level 1 and the level 2 get their stat buffs, and at that point it's pushing a lot of damage. So I found
Yeah.
it like it's definitely a very strong card, and it's one that like you look at initially and you're like 4/4 breakthrough, but then at the same time, even at the very worst, a lot of the decks that have Ouroboros tend to have other ways to buff your creatures. So I've found it's kind of usually finds a way to get additional power, even if you don't get the health buff.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and like you're saying, I think this card is really asking you to pair it with Necrium. It's really hard to get that life gain threshold to hit the marks reliably, or
Yeah.
hit that plus 50 or above mark, and also with the way they kind of tweak the algorithm in Whitefang Pass, you're not as it's very difficult to get an Arborist deck that has a consistent number of life gain sources. Like having an Arborist deck with like 3 life gain sources in it is like a really high roll in Whitefang Pass these days.
Yeah, I would agree.
So
I think most of my Ouroboros decks don't have a ton of life gain, and I think the ones that do tend to have like the Krogius in there, and at that point it's like +7 life overall, and like you don't really want to play the level 1 in this deck because you're trying to gain life. But having the two together can be cool, but it's something that it's pretty tough to get there, especially without Necrom. But
yeah,
yeah.
But very cool card, very splashy, and that will take us to our next creature, which is the Bramble-Axe Warrior. So this is another holistic creature. It is a 2/8 warrior at level 1. And its text reads that at the end of the deck cycle, give this +6 attack. It becomes a 4/12 at level 2 with a +8 attack at the end of the cycle, and then a 7/25 with a +18 attack at level 3. So for this card, you're taking a very minor stat penalty. It's like a -2 for the first 2 levels, and you actually get a +5 stat bonus by the time you get to level 3. But my experience with this card has not been great. It kind of suffers from the same problem you have with the Necrium modifier Abyssal, where if you don't draw it in the 3rd turn of the cycle, it's not likely to survive to benefit from that plus attack buff.
I agree.
And it has such a low attack stat to start with that it doesn't really have a lot of impact on the board. So I haven't had a lot of luck with this card. It's usually a card that if it's in one of my decks, it's usually not a card I'm trying to play, and if I'm playing it, I usually feel pretty bad about it.
I agree.
Yeah. So there's not. I don't know. At level 3, yeah, it can be pretty good, but at most, I mean, I guess if you get really lucky, you can trigger it. I mean, you can only trigger it once, right? Because at the end of cycle 4, it's the end of the game.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I haven't been super impressed with this guy, so I don't think we need to really spend a lot of time on him.
I would say the only thing here. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, absolutely. I want to know what your thoughts are.
The only thing with Bramble-Axe Warrior that I found useful is that it's a warrior. So like if you have a Pack Master in the same deck, you can use that to get the buff, and it tends to have a pretty high health rating. So it's like it can at least take your damage and buff it, but like that's requiring that second card. I think I might have only gotten the buff on the level 1 Bramble-Axe Warrior once ever. So it's like, it's a card I agree. It's like, unless you have it in the 3rd turn of the cycle, it's just really hard to get off and get that ability to really happen.
Yeah, and like I have done it where I've drawn it 3rd cycle, I've played it, I've gotten the buff, and then I felt bad later when I draw the level 2 version. Because like I could have been something else.
I agree 100%.
So, it's just one of those cards that it's interesting, but it just doesn't seem to have a lot of impact on the game. But why don't we move on to the next one of our creatures, something that does have a pretty big impact on the game, and let's talk about the Carnivorous Tarot.
Yeah, so the Carnivorous Tarot, it's a 2/3 plant, and it has deploy, you gain 2 health, and then when you gain life, give this +2/+2. At a level 2, it's or if you don't mind, it's got a 4/5. It has deploy, you gain 3 health, and then when you gain health, you give it +3/+3. And then the level 3 is a 6/7 deploy, you gain 5 health, and then when you gain health, you give this +5/+5. So this is basically Kindred on a body, and you gain life right off the bat whenever you enter it. So it's like basically if you had like a soothing and a kindred creature together, that's what you get with Taro. And this is a card that I think this is one of the ones that I got the most excited about when I saw it spoiled and I saw it actually in the game. And actually, the stat buff is not even that bad because it's -3 at level 1, -3 at level 2, and -2 at level 3. So it's like right off the bat. Well, that's actually with the buff as well. So you
Right.
get the buff, you don't get too far down in your stat buffs, and then next time you gain life, you're immediately above curve. So it's pretty strong in that aspect.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like this kind of replaced the Glowhive Siren, and the thing I like about this is it has a much better survivability. If you can get at a couple procs of it,
Oh,
triggered a couple
100%.
times. Because the problem with the Glowhive Siren in Alpha was that it always had a static health unless you had other ways of pumping it. But with the Taro, you're as you're gaining life, it's literally just Kindred stapled to a soothing creature. Like even the progression's exactly the same.
Oh,
Uh,
100%.
so I
And
like it. Yeah,
I actually think you've killed me with multiple Taros in multiple games that were like 60, 80 plus attack, and it's just like give it breakthrough, and it's just like you just kind of win. So it's like if
yeah,
you have
yeah,
a Taro out, play the second Taro, give them breakthrough in some way, and then it's just like good luck.
yeah, yeah. Just throw a Feral Instinct on it, and you're good to go. And that's the thing too,
Yeah.
is right. If your opponent does not have something like a Dreadbolt or Botanimate that can just get rid of it, it keeps gaining toughness, and the best they can do is chump block it. And if you have ways to give breakthrough or I guess stealth in some cases,
Yeah.
there's going to be a turn where you're going to be able to push it through if they can't nuke it directly. So
Yeah, it's a card I'm terrified every time it hits the board,
yeah,
no matter what deck I'm playing against. And if you pair it with a Shambler, Vampiric, anything else, it just can push so much damage.
yeah, yeah. And it's definitely a linchpin in one of my favorite decks right now. So I
I
like this card quite a bit. I like that they had it as a holistic creature that just does the kindred thing and will show up a bit more often, and it self synergizes, and it's just the right amount of attack and health before you get a second buff on it to feel good
hmm Oh,
about
I
it.
agree. And I actually have a deck that has a Taro and a Kindred creature in it, and it's like that one is so much fun to play because
Yeah,
it's just like you play the Taro, you like trigger them both right off the bat, and it's just so nice.
yeah, yeah. I actually have one too. I haven't played a whole bunch. It's got that, a kindred, and a Krogus in it. I need to find a good pairing for it.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, I'm jealous of that one.
yeah, I think it has a swamp moss in it too. But we'll talk about that
Wow.
one later.
Yeah, oh, for sure, for
Yeah,
sure.
maybe after the stream. But yeah, definitely a really cool card. I like this. I hope it comes back in the next set coming up.
Oh, me
But
too. And I love that it's a plant too, because it has some really cool synergy there.
yeah, yeah, we'll talk about a really cool card that works very well with this
Oh,
later in the
exactly.
episode. And I think you know what I'm thinking about.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
but let's go ahead and talk about the Mustic Megatha. So in Battle for Whitefang Pass, they added a new spell type called Exalts, which I believe we've talked about in previous episodes. We'll talk about them a little bit more, but they're basically spells that stay on the board, and the Mustic Megatha synergizes with that. So it is a 4/5 at level 1 that says when an Exalt is played, give it +2/+2. And while this has 8 or more attack, it has Breakthrough. That goes up to +3/+3 per Exalt, starting off at a 6/7, and then the Breakthrough threshold is 12. And then it's an 11/12 with +4/+4 every time an Exalt is played, and a 19 threshold for the Breakthrough. And what this translates to is that as soon as you play one Exalt, or actually it doesn't even have to be you, it counts any Exalt played, including your opponent playing an Exalt. You're going to get the attack health buff, and you're going to be immediately above curve. Uh, After you do exactly 2 triggers of it, you'll hit the breakthrough threshold, and that applies to all 3 levels. You don't have to get the attack through the breakthrough exalts being played. You can do it with other buff spells, but it is a card that in a exalt heavy deck can do quite a bit. And it has, again, kind of like with the Taro and other kindred creatures, it has that survivability aspect where as long as you keep playing the synergistic cards, the exalts, it will continue to grow and continue to survive until your opponent finds a hard removal way of dealing with it. So
hmm
I definitely like this in a high exalt deck, and I think it's a very good card for deterring your opponent from playing exalts. But what's been
Yeah.
your experience with it, Sam?
So this is a card I've played more in sealed than in constructed, just because it happens to be in sealed decks that I've played.
Hmm.
But this card has done so well for me. It's a card I do think it got a little bit worse after the errata to transform, because there was a lot of times where like I would have an
Hmm.
exalt out that would transform into another exalt and I would get multiple triggers. But
Yes.
despite that, like I had a deck where I played a Mystic Megatha with a Spirit Golem Conclave, and then just off the first exalt you play with the Spirit Golem Conclave, you're immediately giving it a buff and an attack buff. So it's like
Yeah.
you get the exalt, you get the attack buff, and it's usually going to have breakthrough right away. But this card, it's like it's got the fact that it also gains health makes it stick around, and it becomes bigger, and it's got breakthrough. Like
Hmm.
I've been on the other side of these and not played exalts, as you said, because of it. So I think it's a
Yeah.
really fun card, and I think that this one's going to be a really fun one to play once the next set comes out.
Yeah. And this is definitely. I feel like this one's head and shoulders above the sort of Alolan counterpart of the Voltaic Magus
I agree.
because it gets that health bonus. The Magus, it just gets armor, but it never actually like grows its health. So its survivability is not quite the same, and the breakthrough is a big deal. So
Hmm. And I will say that the exalts that tend to be in the decks with the Mystic Megatha tend to be a little bit stronger than some of the exalts I've seen in the deck with the Voltaic Magus. So it's like
yeah,
I tend to want to play the exalts a little more in the green half anyway as well. So that's
for
a nice
sure.
little benefit
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, cool, cool. So let's move on to the Oxidon Rager. Say that 10 times fast.
Yeah, the Oxidon Rager. It's a 6/8 and it's a dinosaur with breakthrough. And when this has no adjacent creatures, destroy it. Now, when you get to the level 2, it becomes a 9/11 with breakthrough, and if it has no adjacent creatures, you destroy it. And then finally, at level 3, it's a 15/17 with breakthrough, and then if it has no adjacent creatures, you destroy it. So this is a card that I've struggled to kind of get to go exactly how I wanted, because a lot of times when I would have it in my hand, I wouldn't have a board state that was really worth it. But the amount of times I've heard Stoneblade say, if you learn how to play this card the right way, this card is insane, has been so many times. So it's a card that
Okay.
like every time I see it, I get excited about it. And it's just it's got pretty good staff buffs because it's a +2, a +2, and a +5 at levels 1, 2, and 3
Mhm.
respectively. And it's got breakthrough, which is really nice because if you get to that level 3, you have a 15/17 with breakthrough. Unless they have the Dreadbolt or the Botanimate, it's likely going to stick. So
Mhm.
it's a card that's strong, and it's a dinosaur, which could have that nice dinosaur synergy. But that last ability, when it has no adjacent creatures destroy it, tends to deter me from wanting to play it overall.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice that the stat bonus is to the health, which gives it more staying power.
Hmm.
But it also, that penalty is that sort of destroy clause. Uh, I think it's one of those cards that's very, very difficult to play like turn one, cycle one, because you're
Yes.
rarely going to have another creature to put out and be able to protect it reliably.
Hmm.
I can see how this can be pretty strong if you just treat it like a dreadbolt and just like catch a creature or knock out a creature on the defense because it does have a pretty decent attack. And if you
Yeah.
treat it more like a spell than a creature, I can see that being pretty powerful. But I feel like in terms of constructed meta, especially that there's direct removal flying around everywhere, and being able to just knock out its neighbor and it at the same time is a pretty big liability
I
for this
agree.
card.
And like even if your opponent isn't trying, like you said, incidentally in combat, you might get through a combat with it and then it just dies because the creature next to it dies.
Exactly.
Um, yeah, so it's the card that like I like to see, and it's okay as an underdrop because its stats aren't bad as a
Yeah,
level 1.
that's true.
But it's still just a card that typically when I see it in a deck, I'm not super excited, but I don't hate it. I guess there's cards I'd like to see less, but it's still a card
Yeah.
that just that last ability is the part that makes it tough for me.
Yeah. I feel like I need to play with this more and not be afraid of it, right? And just like let it do its thing and see if we can figure out the power level,
Yeah,
especially if Stoneblade feels like it's really strong, then
yeah, especially because of something like Low Hive Nursery that could fill your lanes, and then you could also play something to buff its attack. Like, if
right.
you have ways to keep stuff on the board, I could see it being a really strong card because it's just a big breakthrough body.
Right. I can see if you can like position it next to defenders that are hard to kill, like
Yeah,
Dark Heart or Mystical Tangle Sprout. That maybe that's one way to try and keep it on the board longer, just
yeah,
because it's harder for them to attack the neighbors off Forge. But I think this is one of those cards that you need to kind of experiment with and really see I think it takes a lot. It's going to take a lot of skill to play it correctly. I'll leave it at that.
I agree.
Okay, so what comes after our Oxygen Ranger? Let's check out the Shard Plate Behemoth. So this is an interesting new beast. It is a 0/8 at level 1, and its text reads, "This deals damage with its health instead of its attack." So effectively you have an 8/8 at level 1, sort of, and we'll get into that. At level 2 it's got the same text, but it becomes a 0/12. And then at level 3 it's got the same text, but becomes a 0/18. So if you're looking at it in terms of the way the ability affects its stats, it's actually, you have to kind of do a little bit of mental gymnastics, but it has a +4, +6, and +5 bonus to its stats if you consider it being symmetrical, which is pretty big. One thing I have noticed is that, and this maybe I'm reading to this, but I think every deck, the way the algorithm works is that it will have some way of increasing health in the deck that it's generated with, either with a plus attack, plus health card, or something like a Mystical Tangle Sprout. So it's going to be generated in a deck that wants to also increase health in other means. Yeah, I think this thing's awesome. It's really good at taking something out, but one of the things you have to be careful of is that it not only shrinks its health, but its attack at the same time, right? And
that is very true.
You also have to be careful that increasing its attack does nothing. If you have a card like a Spirit Golem Conclave, it does literally nothing for this because it ignores the attack aspect of it. But
yeah,
I've liked this card. I've enjoyed playing it in the decks that have had it. And I think it's just a really good underdrop. Like, even an 8/8 at level 2, you can take something out and just have a body there as fodder for something later.
Oh, yeah.
What about you?
This is a card, as you said, I actually love this card. It was one of the ones that I saw when it initially was spoiled and came out, and I got a deck with it, and I'm like, oh, this is okay. And then when I kind of faced it the first time, I was like, wow, this card is a lot stronger than I thought. Mm-hmm. And it's just one of those things where it's like, you look at it when it hits the board, you're like 0/8, whatever. And then it's just like the first time you take 8 damage because you're not really paying attention to the ability, or just the fact that it's just like, yeah, you gotta kill something of your own to be able to block it, and then the Shard Plate Behemoth is still gonna live. But then at the same time, it's going to have a less power, but it still stays on the board and it sticks. Right. So it's like you have to either put a lot of resources in front of it to kill it, or you need something like a Dreadbolt or Suppressing, right, or something of that nature that's going to destroy it without having to put a lot of resources into it. But I actually have a deck that's got a Brashful Keeper with the Shard Plate Behemoth and a Shard King. So it's like I could just drop the Shard King to give it breakthrough, nice, and then I could keep increasing its defense with the Keeper. And it's just like you could kind of loop the 3 of those together to just keep making it stronger and stronger and stronger, just like you said. And it's just the fact that it's a beast is really nice in that aspect. So I agree. This is a fun card, and it's one that I see it and I get excited in a list.
Yeah. And that's another thing too. You're mentioning how we had talked about how it leaves a body behind and usually takes something out, so you have to spend other resources. And you can't ignore it, because if you could leave it there as like a 0/2, but you know your opponent's going to have ways of buffing it. So you need to put something in front of it and hope that they don't have like a lead the charge to give another +6 health all of a sudden and just eat your next thing again. So yeah, there's it's a good threat, and it has staying power, and it's very hard to play around.
I agree.
It's sort of, straight removal, but that's kind of every creature except for Krogius is susceptible to stuff like that. So
yeah.
So let's move on to the Stegodon Alpha.
Yeah, so Stegodon Alpha, it's a 5/4 dinosaur, and it has Slay, give another one of your creatures +2/+2. When you get to level 2, it's an 8/6 that has Slay, give another one of your creatures +3/+3. And when you get to the level 3 version of the card, it's a 12/8 with Slay, give another one of your creatures +5/+5. So this is another card that's a dinosaur that kind of, it's nice to be a dinosaur, but it doesn't really have a ton of ways to synergize with other dinosaurs, in my opinion. Which, obviously, you have other cards that kind of buff off dinosaurs, but in set 2, I've noticed there's not as much dinosaur synergy as there is in set 1, where you really want to have a dino deck. That being said, the Slay ability here, it's a lot more relevant than I thought it would be. Granted, the stat effect on the card itself. It's a -3, -4, and -7. So it definitely is underpowered for the fact that it's going to be giving stats to another creature. So that slay ability, it's like it's a little bit hard to get off, but like a lot of times if I play it, I'm playing it off Forge as my second play. That way I know that I'm going to be able to slay and get the buff, even if
Mm-hmm.
the Stegodon Alpha dies, if I know I need a buff on another creature for the following turn. But it's definitely like, I would say it's like a middle of the road card that if I see it in the deck, I'm not super upset about it. But
Mm-hmm.
it's also something that I don't necessarily like. There's a lot of hands where if I draw it, I probably don't play it. It's got to be it's almost like a situational card for me. What do you think
Right.
about it?
Yeah, I have not been super impressed by it. And I think I've talked about this in other episodes, but giving stat bonuses after combat in most situations is
Hmm.
often too late. Either the board is going to clear itself, and you're not going to be able to give the bonus to. You're not going to have any creatures left to give that bonus to. So you're
Hmm.
taking a stat penalty on the front, and you may not get that payoff on the back. The fact that it also has a low health to begin with means it's not. At best, you're going to trade mostly. It's rare that you're going to be able to throw this in something, catch it, and survive and slay it at the same. Like all three of those things lining up and having a creature to buff at the same time. It's a lot of things that have to line up
Oh, for sure.
that it's not a very reliable card, which is one of those things that makes it hesitant for me to want to level it. Because, yeah, in cycle one, maybe it lined up, but then I have this creature that may or may not line up in cycle two or three, and I could have upgraded something better. So it depends on how your deck is playing. If you have a very high
Yeah.
Dino Synergy deck, or um, and you have ways to buff its health to keep it to help it survive, I can see it being pretty strong. But I'd rather have something like an Pterodon Mauler, where if it just hits your
Oh,
opponent, you get the bonus.
100%.
Um,
I agree with you there. And I guess the biggest thing is with a card like this, it's like, it's one of those things where like I'm happy if I have it in a deck as an option if I think the deck is aggressive enough where it will respect that. Because Slay is kind of hard to get off in general. Like
right.
no matter what, when I have a Slay ability, it's like you can't rely on it. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, there might be that Dino synergy of your Pterodon Nest where you could kind of get your buff by playing it, but at the same time, it's like I would rather have a different card in a lot of cases that can do something either on deploy or something that will, like you said, have a little bit more staying ability on the board. It's the same reason why Fiend is a strong card, but a lot of times people will play around it where it doesn't die or doesn't trigger on the
Right.
board.
Yeah, or it'll
So
die when on an empty board and you don't get that bonus, right? Yeah.
yeah, and I feel like the only time actually now that I'm thinking about it where I've had success with this card was in sealed, because in
Yeah.
sealed you don't have that full power level. But like thinking about it, I don't think I've ever actually dropped this in constructed.
Yeah. I think this is a good sealed card. I think that's a good way
Yes.
of putting it. It's got
Yeah,
some. Because sealed is very combat oriented, right?
I agree.
So you have a lot of play there with it, and I can see it being pretty strong in sealed, especially with if you have a high concentration of dinos, or maybe you're like playing with a Loyan where you can give armor or buff things pretty good.
Mhm.
Keeping it on the board for a long period of time in sealed can be pretty strong.
Yeah.
But let's go ahead and go down to our last holistic creature, which is the Wolfstar Djinn. So, the Wolfstar Djinn is a 4/4 spirit at level 1, and it reads, when you use your Forgeborn's ability, give this +4 attack and +4 health. At level 2, it becomes a 5/5, and that bonus goes up to 5/5. And then at level 3, it's a 6/6, but the ability changes to when you use your Forgeborn's ability, double this creature's attack and health. I will be honest, I've not had a chance to play with this very much. What you are experiencing in terms of stat penalty is a -4, -8, and -15 off the top. So
Hmm.
you're getting a pretty big stat penalty, but activating it is going to put it above curve, so it does make it a bit of an underdrop. Like it's a good underdrop because you can drop it and then immediately activate your Forgeborn. In cycle 2, you'll get an 8/8 or a 10/10, which is pretty good. And as far as the third level one, you really need a way in your deck to increase its attack and health outside of the Forgeborn ability, because you want to do that before you
Yeah.
activate your Forgeborn. I know it's really good with Oros's Dark Forge Drain, especially at level 3,
Mm.
because the way that the batching system works, you're going to get the bonus of Dark Forge Dream before you do the doubling. So that can be really strong.
Oh yeah.
But one thing that sort of turns me off on this creature is the complete lack of any sort of evasive ability like stealth or breakthrough. So it's really just a big stat monster some of the time, assuming you draw it before you need to use your Forgeborn ability. But again, I haven't played with it a ton. I don't know. Have you had any luck with this card?
I've only used it in sealed, and I will say the couple games where I had it in my hand, it just didn't do what I wanted it to do. Like I've never got it to level 3, so I
Mm,
couldn't say like the ability is strong if you could get it to work, and it's a card that like I feel like if you could somehow accelerate it, but you're almost like building around the card, and like you said, there's no evasive abilities on the card itself, so it's almost like you need a Shard King or something else that will give it
right.
breakthrough or give it stealth. That being said. The one thing that I find interesting on the card is that it's a spirit. So I think it'll synergize pretty well with the next set,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that there's a lot of spirit synergy. So I'm hoping that that alone will kind of help it in the future. Like this might be one of those cards that's like put in set 2 for set 3.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, we'll have to see if they bring it back
Yeah,
in the last winter.
I agree.
But you have to work. It does take a bit of legwork to get it to work. So you have to put a bit of an investment into it. And again, the way games play out, you just may not have as much control over it as it. I think it makes a promise that it can't always deliver on.
Yep.
Because there's just gonna be situations where you have to pop your Forgeborn ability before you draw this card, and then it's very understated if you can't line it
Yeah,
up
and like
right.
the one or two games I've played it, I've felt the pressure to play my Forgeborn ability to buff it so it could live through combat, and it's like I don't want to be forced to use my ability just for that one creature. So it's
Exactly.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd rather just have something that's statted at a little bit higher of a base stat with a different deployability instead.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, so that is the last of our holistic creatures. So let's move on to the forged creatures. So let's start off with the Aether Root. So when
Yeah,
we do these, we're going to do it in terms of like combat just as our baseline, but we'll talk about kind of what the stat penalty is because we don't know what the modifier will be. So the really relevant part is how much of a penalty are you taking and what is the ability that you're getting. So,
awesome.
yeah, if you
Do you
want to
want
go
me
ahead
to
and
take
take
this
this.
one? Or?
Yeah, yeah, well,
Yeah. So Combat Aether Root is a 7/3, and it has when you gain health, you give this health equal to the amount gained. At level 2, it is an 11/5. When you gain health, you give this a health equal to the amount gained. And then at level 3, it's a 15/9. When you gain health, you give this health equal to the amount gained. So our stat buffs here is -2, -2, and -3, levels 1 to 3 respectively. So this is a card that I haven't gotten it really to work in a deck yet. It's a card that I look at and I'm like, man, I really wish I had this in a Kindred deck with life gain. Or it's
hmm
a card that's like almost like half Kindred, but you also, if you gain more life, it actually, like if you have a level 3 Shambler, you're gaining 3 every trigger instead of just whatever your base stat would be off
right.
of like your health gain if you're playing like a level 1 Kindred. That being said, it's just a card where it's like I feel like it's just really critical that you have a good modifier on it. Like a Soothing Aether Root is really nice, I will
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, I've seen also a Kindred Aether Root as well.
Ooh, yeah, that one would be crazy.
Yeah, so that double dipping is pretty cool. I mean, you don't take much of a stat penalty on it to begin with. It's a -2, -2, -3 in terms of like the progression. And
Hmm.
it seems to be weighted towards attack, which means that what you're doing when you're gaining life is you're giving it more survivability.
That's a good
Uh,
point.
so it can be a decent underdrop with the right modifier. Again, I have not had the chance to get it to work, but I'm looking. I would look for this in a deck that has something like a refreshing creature in it too,
Oh
because you
yeah.
get just a nice big chunk of life all at once to give it that stat bonus. Uh, and in general, in SolForge, having higher health is more important than having higher attack because the longer you keep a creature on the board, the more action equity you get out of it.
Hmm.
So the fact that this thing keeps growing is nice. Like it's the reverse of an Glowhive Siren, where it's gaining health instead of gaining attack. But again, with that comes survivability. So depending on what modifier you get with it, it can be pretty cool.
Oh,
Uh,
for sure. And there's a few cards, which I know one of them we're going to be talking about shortly, that really synergize well with this. So it's like when
yeah,
we get there, obviously we could come back and be like, this is the card that's really good with Aether Root.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, if you can get them both, it's pretty spicy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but let's go ahead and talk about the next for our forge creature, which is the elk. So the elk is a Combat Elk is a 5/5 with a Slay ability. You gain 3 life. It goes up to 4 life at level 2, and then 5 life at level 3 for the Slay ability. And you're taking basically a 2-point penalty across the board. So you're just losing an attack and a health across the board, but you're getting the Slay ability out of it. So if your deck has life gain synergies in it, this can be very strong. It's not really that far below curve. It depends on what modifier you get with it, obviously. But in terms of just sort of like raw stats, this sort of repeatable life gain is really nice. And you're not taking a very big penalty to get that. So yeah, I like it. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's a card that I feel like tends to show up in my decks that have Kindred or Taro or something like that inside of my like set 2 decks.
Yeah.
So as a result, it's like one of the, like you said, consistent ways to gain life. Now, obviously, it's a Slay ability, so it's like you're not always going to be able to gain life every turn off of using an ult. But that being said, it's a card that's usually, like you said, it's relatively well statted for also having a Slay ability, and it's like because it's a beast, you could buff it with a patron, and you could give it additional power in other ways.
Right.
So it's a card that I feel like, again, like depending on the modifier, it could be really strong. Like Brashful Elk is one that I always love to see. Giving it aggressive and breakthrough tends to be really fun. But just any ways that you could kind of force combat, give it buff to an attack, or even just let it stay on the board a little bit longer. I was gonna say, I think I have like a hibernating elk, which is just like really, really fun to play because it tends to actually be well statted on the defense side or the health side, so you could have it stick around. And once you get to like the final one, I think it's like it's very well statted. I don't remember the number, but it's a really nice card to have because you're likely going to slay every time.
Yeah, and this is really good at catching minions too. Like it's well positioned stat wise to catch just about every minion if you keep it on curve.
Yep.
So you get a little bit of bonus out of that, and you can usually keep it around an extra turn after you eat a minion with it. So
for sure,
definitely a cool little package. So let's go ahead and talk about the Combat Lotus, part of the infamous underdrop cycle that I've talked about in the past. But I'll let you introduce this one.
So Combat Lotus is a 3/4 plant. It has Deploy. If this is lower level than your Forgeborn, you may give another creature +3/+3. Now, when you get to level 2, it's a 5/5. Deploy. If this is lower level than your Forgeborn, you may give another creature +5/+5. And then finally, at level 3, it's an 8/9, or Combat Lotus is an 8/9. It has Deploy. If this is a level lower than your Forgeborn, you may give another creature +8/+8. So Lotus is a card that I feel like whenever I see it in my hand or see it in the deck initially, I'm usually like, I have a Lotus in here. But at the same time, it's just the fact that it can buff a creature on enter if you play it underleveled. It's one of those cards that you don't have to worry about during cycle 1. And then if you draw it in cycle 2 and you're just like, you know what? I could actually benefit off of the stat buff on another creature. It's definitely nice. Like I would almost rather have a Lotus than a Stegodon Alpha because you could reliably get the buff instead of having to rely on the Slay. What do you think about Lotus?
Yeah, so I've been on the soapbox before about how I feel like they're a little too conservative with how they statted these. That you're playing a very understated creature below curve, like you're as an underdrop, so the body that you're getting is not really worth the payoff that you're getting. That said, Lotus is a little bit better than some because it could save a very important creature, right? Giving just 3 health will maybe make the difference between keeping, an Oak Father on the board for another turn, right? And then you have another set of breakthrough, like another round of breakthrough damage to go through. So, given that, the being able to not worry about it at level 1, having just that little bit of extra combat manipulation is nice, but it's not a card that I really care for that much. The only one that I've seen that I think is kind of neat is like Roaring Lotus, where you get 2 different buffs. It's almost becomes like a double buff spell, and you just get this chump blocker or something you could sacrifice if you're doing Necrium to some other effect. So in that case, it's a little bit more interesting. So if you have a really interesting modifier on it, it could be good, but if it's just a raw stat stick like a Combat Lotus, the stats just aren't there. Even when you add together the buff,
Yeah, because I didn't mention it, but it's a -5, -8, and -10. So it's just really understated compared to other creatures. And
Right.
like you said, I would have hoped that if you're kind of forced to play this under level, that they would have been like plus, at least plus, you know what I mean, or at least
Right.
even. Because at neutral, it's like, okay, I don't feel as bad under leveling this. I
Right.
agree. It's like it's very critical to have a good modifier because I would not consider playing a Lotus that didn't have a good modifier because of the same reason as you said. It's just underwhelming otherwise, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, well, we don't have to talk too much about that, but we do have another exciting one coming up. So let's talk
Ooh,
about the Patriarch, and I think it's my turn to talk about it. So what is the Patriarch? So this is our new dinosaur payoff in Battle for Whitefang Pass. So at level 1, the Combat Patriarch's a 5/5 that says when another one of your dinosaurs comes to play, give it +2/+2. That goes up to a 7/7 with a +4/+4 bonus, and then a 10/11 with a +6/+6 bonus. So you're losing 2, 4, and 6 stats to get a massive dinosaur buffer on the field.
yeah.
Uh, I like this guy in decks that really want to do stuff with dinosaurs. I have not had the good fortune of finding good dinosaur decks. I've never been able to get dinosaurs to work, but he doesn't take a very big stat penalty, and the payoff is huge, and it's a big lightning rod. Like, your opponent is going to want to get rid of this as quick as possible, and they may not always be able to, depending on the modifier you get. Like, if you get a stout or something like that, you know, something with
Mhm.
really high toughness. And the one thing I do like about this is it's got a much better raw stats than I think it's a much better raw stats than the Rex from set 1. And you get the bonus attack and defense right off the bat. You don't have to wait till level 2 and 3. Even though you lose out on that fight, this basically replaced the Rex.
Mhm.
But I kind of like the fact that you get that attack and health bonus right off the first level. But what are your thoughts on it, Sam?
Yeah, so this is a card, like you said, I kind of wish that I had a way to play this and Rex in the same deck. So it's like I definitely need to pick up a tray of at least one of the two,
Mm-hmm.
because having the two together would be incredible. But I will say, just like you said, this is a card that is immediate lightning rod for removal. So even if you have one other dinosaur in your deck, if you see it on the board knowing that it's going to be able to buff that other dinosaur, a lot of times I either have to remove it immediately if I play against it, or it's something that my
Mm-hmm.
opponents have removed immediately when I played it. And I've seen there's a couple really cool modifiers on Patriarch. Like I've seen a Kindred Patriarch with some life gain, and that deck was
Oh,
pretty
that's
cool to
cool.
play against. I've also seen Brashful Patriarch in a couple decks, and that one is pretty insane because it's just like you could kind of evasively push damage with it and then play a dinosaur the next turn, and
Right.
then just like buff that too. And it's a card that I've seen actually paired in quite a few Shard King decks, and being able to play Patriarch and the Shard King, which has Breakthrough, is pretty incredible. And then you
Right.
could put the Patriarch in a lane that has the Shard Cavern. So it's like those two together are probably my two favorite dinosaurs next to each
Yeah.
other because of that.
Yeah. And we'll definitely be talking about Shard King
Oh,
when we
sorry,
get
yeah.
to. Yeah, no, no, it's okay. Yeah. But yeah, like, it's definitely a good linchpin card for dinosaur decks. And
I
would
agree.
think you'd probably actually be looking more at set alpha set
Yeah.
Tempe's decks with the WRECK Rex, um,
Yes.
to look to pair with this most of the time.
I
Uh,
agree with you 100%.
yeah, unless you have a betrayer like me in Necrim of all colors.
Oh, yeah, that's incredible. I'm
Yeah,
jealous.
I'll have to show you that one as well at some
Yeah, for
point.
sure.
But yeah, let's talk about the card that we've been hinting at. Let's talk about the Sower. So
Yeah.
this is a fun new one. Why don't you talk about this one, Sam?
Yeah, so the Combat Sower is a 3/6 mage, and it has deploy, you gain 3 life, give your plants plus 3 health. At level 2, it's a Combat Sower is a 5/9. With deploy, you gain 4 health, give your plants plus 4 health. And then at level 3, it's an 8/14. With deploy, you gain 5 health and give your plants plus 5 health.
Yeah.
So this is a card with all the plant synergy in this set, plus the life gain synergy with stuff like Taro. I just really like Sower because a
Yes.
lot of times it's one of the few ways to reliably gain life because it just has deploy, gain life, which there's really not that many creatures in set 2 that have just kind of, except for something with like a soothing modifier
Hmm.
or like refreshing. So Sower is a card that like I love to see if I have a deck with Kindred or Taro or something of that nature. But the
Yeah.
fact that again, Carnivorous Taro is a plant, and then so is your Aether Root, which is kind of the card that we were hinting at before, where Aether Root's a plant that when you gain life, it gains additional health, and then
Right.
plus your plants get additional health when you play it. So it's like a really, really big bonus when you play a Sower into an Aether Root.
Yeah, it's definitely huge. It's definitely a huge buff that you're getting out of it if you can line it up with like you said, the Taro or the Aether Root.
Hmm.
And the nice thing too is because of the way the algorithm works, if you have a plant in your deck, you're gonna like you can't get this without having some way of making a plant. Just as a sort of a note, there are 7 Uterra plants in the set, uh, and there's also Oak Fathers are plant spirits.
Yeah,
So that's something to keep in mind. So there's not a ton of plants, but that also means you're more likely to hit one of the really cool ones like the taro or the Aether Root to go with it.
exactly. And even with all that extra ability for the deploy, the stat like or the stat detriment is not that high because it's -3, -4, and -5, and I would happily give up those stats to be able to gain the life and potentially buff my other plants.
Yeah, and if you do hit one of the plants with it, you break even overall in stats, and you're actually giving more survivability. So
Exactly.
the Sora is really cool. I'm sad it's a rare and not like a common, but when you see it, definitely keep your eyes peeled for this one and look at the different sort of synergies you can do with it.
100%.
So that is the last of our forged creatures. So we need to talk about the forged modifiers. These are our adjectives, and we've got 5 of these. And we'll go ahead and start off with biting. And you'll notice on my screen I'm doing the betrayer biting tactician, and the reason I'm doing that is just so that we have a baseline of a really quick reference of how the stats are being affected. So biting is reads at the end of this deck cycle, give this +2 attack and +2 health. That goes up to +4/+4, and then +6/+6 at the end of the deck cycle. So this is an interesting ability. You're not taking much of a stat penalty on it. You take a -1, -2, and -3 overall stat penalty for the potential buff. With this one, unlike Bramble Axe Warrior, I'm actually okay with this one uh, because of the fact that you don't take much of a stat penalty off the bat,
Yeah.
and it's only hurting the attack a little bit. Like you can see, you take -2 attack on level 2 and -2 attack on level 3, and just a little bit of health ding. So sometimes you'll draw that card that has the biting at the end of the cycle. Sometimes you won't, but you're not getting a body that's anemic in the process, right? You're getting something that's still kind of on curve with a combat creature with a sort of upside. But what are your thoughts on biting? Do you have anything that you've done with
Yeah.
biting before?
So I actually do have a biting elk, and that one's a nice one just because obviously you're trying to slay, kill creatures to gain life, and then at the end of each cycle, if it ends up surviving through the cycle, you then are able to buff it back up so it can kind of continue killing creatures.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, I tend to hesitate at abilities that are reliant on deck cycles, just because
Yeah,
again, it's like you play it early on in the cycle, you just don't feel as good about it unless you play it in turn 3.
yeah,
But granted, if it's on a good enough base creature where you're happy to have it as an extra little ability, it can be really nice. But it's just usually if my opponent plays a biting card, I'm not super terrified of it, and it's like a lot of times I'm just like, even if it lives, like I'm okay if it gets +2/+2 because over the next cycle I have 3 turns to kill it versus
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah,
But it's not horrible. Like there's definitely worse modifiers for me.
yeah. It's definitely like situationally good, but not. It's just kind of average. It's, like I said, it's not much different than a combat creature, with just a sort of a little bit of an upside.
Yeah, for sure.
Uh, so after that, we've got Brashful. If you want to take Brashful, since you've been talking about that already.
Yeah, so Brashful's an ability that gives aggressive and breakthrough. It has a stat bonus of -2, -3, and -7. So if you end up going at the Brashful Tactician, you kind of see that I think it takes more away from the toughness than the power at all 3 levels, correct?
Yeah, yeah. So you're losing
So
at the toughness for the most part.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, like Brashful giving both aggressive and breakthrough is perfect for something like Uterra, just because you're really trying to push a lot of damage. And it's like one of those cards where if you play it on curve, you're happy because it has breakthrough. Or sorry, on forge. But if you play it off forge, you're also thrilled because it has aggressive and breakthrough.
Right.
So the amount of times where if my opponent has a Brashful card in their deck, I have to be very, very aware of it, and I have to be very like situationally be like, okay, if they have the Brashful and currently I'm on Forge, like how am I gonna play around this? So
Right.
granted, it's usually like best if you play it off Forge because the stat decrease tends to because it's lower toughness, it's pretty easy to kill. But at the same time, it's like because it has breakthrough, it's just like now I have to block it. I have to take damage. It just tends to be an ability that I really like. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts?
Yeah, I like it. Like you said, it's really great to open lane off Forge because you get that big hit, and because it has a low toughness or a low health modifier, you want it to kind of survive. So sometimes you can like catch a minion with it and then do some push through damage, or like you said, you just open lane it and hope for the best. But yeah, you get that extra breakthrough damage. You can stay on the aggression. It forces your opponent to put something in the way or use a removal spell on it. And still pretty good on Forge. Especially if you can put it in front of something that can't kill it, because
Oh
then you
yeah,
get that breakthrough. And if you throw like the level 1 version, right, like a 6/4 in front of a mindless zombie, well, now they have to decide: am I going to kill this thing? Am I going to replace my zombie? What it puts them in an awkward position.
yeah,
So I definitely dig the combination of aggressive and breakthrough. It's a little bit cool. I like it a little bit better than stampeding, which I think is the just breakthrough, straight up breakthrough.
hmm
I think stampeding, you get better stats out of the deal, but I like the flexibility of having that damage off forge for
me
sure.
too. And like the fact that it's almost always a 2-for-1 because you're likely killing a creature and dealing damage,
Hmm.
or like dealing extra damage and it lives another turn. So it's like it's just a really strong ability. And I've actually seen a lot of people play this with Nova Elementalist just for the
Hmm.
sake that you could basically have it in an open lane, Rumble Spark lane, and just
Right.
flip your Rumble. Not
Yeah.
to go into another faction, but it's
Yeah.
just it's
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's good to know
Brashful.
like kind of how people
Yeah,
are utilizing it for sure.
yeah.
Um,
It's an ability that I'm usually very scared of when I see it. I'm like,
mhm.
oh, they have Brashful.
Yeah, it's
So
definitely more scary than raging,
yes.
because of that breakthrough part of it. Yeah, for sure. All right, let's move on to Noxious. So Noxious is deploy, deal 4 damage to all exhausted enemy creatures. So that's any creature that's used an activate ability. That becomes 8 damage to all exhausted creatures at level 2. And then it just flat out destroys all exhausted enemy creatures at level 3. This is a really, really cool modifier, and you're taking like -1, -2 stat penalty, really. Like, it's hardly any stat penalty for a possibly game warping effect.
Oh
it's
yeah.
it's really good against like mage decks, right, where they have all these activate things like Allomancers and Fire Fist your antes and things that you can just take out incidentally. It's really good against those toolbox decks. As very threatening. Like it can really make your opponent rethink whether they should activate immediately or wait, right? Because sometimes you want to a really common play pattern, right, is to activate your activates as soon as you possibly can because you don't want it to get like dread bolted or botanimated. And this puts the question, puts your opponent to the question, well, what if activating it's the wrong decision?
Yeah.
Because I might take it out with my Noxious creature. So it's definitely a cool modifier. What's been your? I don't have any of these actually, so I haven't been
Oh
able to play
really?
with it because it is a rare modifier. So I
Oh, you're
haven't seen
right.
it in any deck that I've been able to play. I might have a deck with it, but not one that's like competitive enough to play. So I
So
haven't had any experience with it. But what about you, Sam?
so what I will say is typically the decks when I've played it with something with Noxious, I tend to play against opponents who don't have a lot of activated abilities. But what I will say is the decks that I tend to play, Noxious would destroy me. Because I love playing cards that have activated abilities. Like I love the
Yeah.
Blight Witches, I love playing Drix, I love playing really anything that's gonna gain me advantage by activating each turn. And the fact that you can basically do so much damage to them. It's like, it makes you think, like, do I activate my Blight Witch? Because are they going to have their Noxious creature? Do I activate my Drix? Because I'm pretty sure this kills Drix on curve completely, right? Because Drix is in...
Yes.
Yeah, so it's like, I wonder if this ability was, like, specifically made to counter Drix, because it's like 4/8 destroy. So it's like...
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just, it's an ability that I've never gotten great benefit off of it myself, but I look at it every time and I'm like, wow, this would destroy me, and this would destroy a lot of the decks that I see people play, because of the fact that it just punishes you so much for activating over and over and over again.
Yeah, but you know, again, it's one of those things that has to line up, and it's only good against certain decks. So it's not like it's not like a modifier that you build your deck around, but it's kind of one of those toolbox cards that when you draw it, it can be really damaging at the right point in time.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, I hope to have one Noxious card in a deck that I know I'm going to play because of that. So it's like a toolbox, basically. If I need it, I need it. If I don't, I just don't play it.
Exactly. Yeah, and the stats aren't that bad anyway, so you know, sometimes you just need a stat stick, and you don't worry about the modifier.
Exactly.
And that will bring us to Petrifying.
So Petrifying. So Petrifying is a -1 stat bonus at level 1. It says, when this deals damage to a creature, exhaust it. It does not ready at the start of the next turn. At level 2, it's a -1 stat bonus that also says, when this damages a creature, exhaust it. It does not ready at the start of the next turn. And at level 3, it's also a -1 stat bonus that has, when this deals damage to a creature, exhaust it. It does not ready until the start of the next turn. So the ability is constant through all levels. So it's a great underdrop, because it's like, you don't have to play the level 3 to be able to get the benefit. But that being said, it works so well with Noxious, because basically, if you can deal damage with a Petrifying creature, and then the next turn go and activate a Noxious, you can deal damage and just kind of get a lot of benefit out of an ability that is something where it's like, do they really want to block it if they know that they're going to potentially be harmed by that exhaustion? So I like it a lot, and the stat bonus, or the stat, it's like really not that bad, just -1 across the board. So it's like, it's a card that I'd love to have as a toolbox, because if they're playing a Blight Witch and you could just manage to put a Petrifying creature in front of it, then you're just going to guarantee that it can't ready at the next turn, and you can't activate it the next turn.
Right. Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on this. I'm just curious, like, how often the ability becomes relevant.
That's true.
Whereas, like, what are the odds that it's going to be across from an activate creature, and that creature cares about activating every turn? Like, it could be a mobility creature, and that, you know, who cares? And that it's actually going to survive the hit from the creature too, right? Like, killing a creature is a good way of not letting it ready.
Yeah. So that's a really good point.
You know, it's an interesting ability. I think it's kind of interesting that they kind of double dipped here with this sort of exhaustion mechanic in set 2, with the Noxious and the Petrifying being in the same set. Yeah. It's interesting that that's sort of a play space for Uterra. But again, it's a rare modifier. It's not one I've had a lot of experience with, and it just seems like a very situational one. But you're not taking a big stat penalty, so I'd rather have this than a combat creature.
I would agree.
For sure.
Yeah, I've never actually seen it trigger. I will say that. I've never actually seen it benefit in a trigger. But just I do have a deck with both a Noxious and a Petrifying, and I was like, this is cool, I'll play it. And then it just wasn't good enough for me to want to play. So
right. I mean, I guess that there is that thing too, right? Like, it doesn't have to be it can petrify a creature that doesn't have an activate, and then it can get hit by the Noxious. Yeah. And there's a spell we'll talk about later that also cares about exhausted creatures, but you know, it's kind of like a weird sort of fringe ability that may be relevant here and there, but it's definitely not something you are going to seek out specifically in a deck. It's just, oh, it's in my deck. It might come up sometime.
I agree, for sure.
All right, we got 2 more of these. We've got the Spiky. So Spiky is, at the start of combat, this deals 2 damage to the opposing creature. That goes up to 3 damage at level 2, and then 5 damage at level 3. So what does that mean? So at the start of combat, you basically get to do direct damage to the opposing creature. And there's a couple things to note about that. One is, if it kills the creature, then the spiky creature doesn't fight that creature at all. Also, if it kills the creature and it's in the front row, it's going to go directly to your opponent's face in that combat. So Spiky is very interesting. Notably, the stat penalty you're getting is -3, -4, and -6, and so you're getting a little bit of a penalty on health, but it actually turns out, I believe, that the damage lines up with mostly with what it would have been if it was just raw attack. So, in terms of killing creatures, you kind of have this sort of situationally beneficial extra damage things, but a lot of times, you're gonna get, it's just not gonna matter. It's just gonna be straight up as if it had 2 extra power. But there are gonna be those situations where you're gonna knock something out and it's not gonna hit it back, and that can be very powerful. What's your experience been with Spiky?
I've actually really enjoyed Spiky because it just prevents people from being able to chump block something like a Wisp because it just
Mm-hmm.
kills your Wisp. It kills at the next level, it kills the mindless zombies. So it's going to kill a lot of the minions that they could jump in front of it. I actually have a Spiky Alamancer in one of my decks that is
Oh,
really
cool.
fun to play because it's like I can ping their creature and then Spiky the creature, so it's like it sticks around.
Right.
It's one of those things, like you said, even though it's like a similar stat bonus to kind of where the attack would be if the damage wasn't being done at the beginning of combat, just having that ability to potentially, like, they can't underdrop and block and kill your creature. Like, a lot of people tend to forget about Spiky, I've found. Like, I've played a Spiky creature and they'll be like, put something low in power in front of it, and then I'll go be like, okay, so it takes 2, and they're like, oh man. And even though it's like on the card, it's just like an ability that I don't see played a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
as a result, it's just like, it can just those turns where it kills the creature before combat feel so good.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely situationally very, very strong, and it's also kind of cool on creatures that have have slay abilities, like an elk.
Oh yeah.
Getting that extra bonus, and there's gonna be interesting situations where you have like a spiky elk and a kindred creature, so you get the kindred buff before combat.
Oh yeah.
So pay attention to this ability. It seems pretty innocuous, but it does a lot of work.
hmm
Uh,
And specifically, the level 3 Spiky being able to deal 5 damage tends to be really strong, especially if you play it off Forge,
mhm.
because it's like basically they could have a creature that's got really high power, breakthrough, whatever, that they're going to play on the offensive, and then it's just being able to then drop this in front of it, kill it before damage, and then just
Hmm.
have a creature that's going to stick on the board. I find that it's almost better defensively than it is offensively in that aspect.
Yeah, it's really good at cleaning up creatures from previous turns combats too, right? Because there's a lot
Yes,
of combats where a
exactly.
creature will survive with 1 or 2 health, and if you're off forge, you just throw this in front of it right before combat, and you just take out a creature and have a big body left over afterwards.
Yeah, exactly.
All
So it's an
right.
ability that I hope sticks around to the next
Yeah, I
set
hope
because
they
I
bring
love it.
this one back. This is a very cool one. All right.
I agree.
Last forge ability is toxic. So do you want to go over toxic?
Yeah. So toxic, it gives a -3 stat buff at level 1, and it gives the opposing creature -2, and then give the creature +2, or sorry, give opposing creature in this lane -2 to give your creature +2 health. At level 3, it's a -4 stat bonus, and it gives a -3 to give your creature +3. And then finally, at level 3, Toxic is a -5 stat bonus. Give the opposing creature -4 to give one of your creatures +4. So it's almost like it's a toxic spores on a creature, which is
Mm-hmm.
really nice because at the end of the day, I've found a lot of times with a toxic creature, you're kind of able to just clean up something off of an off combat, like you mentioned with Spiky.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also something that buffs your own creature as well. So it's like you almost feel really good playing it against another creature because it'll kill wisps right away. If you have it, like I have it on a Toxic Basher that I really enjoy playing
Mm-hmm.
because it buffs the health, it kills something, and it pushes more breakthrough damage forward. So I think Toxic, even though you kind of have a negative stat buff, as long as you play it in an opposing lane, you technically make up that buff pretty immediately. And it's like you're technically, because you're giving one of their creatures -2, you're technically getting a 4 point swing, even though the stat buff is -3. Um,
Right. Yeah.
yeah, what do you think?
I think it's fine. I don't think again it's really good if you can clean up a creature with it. The one thing I don't like about it is that it's a pretty big stat penalty if you're playing it to like an open board, or if you don't want to put it in front of the creature that's on the board. Like if they only have one creature and it's not a creature you want to block or that this could survive combat with,
Yeah.
again you're getting kind of an understated creature if you can't benefit from it. But the times where it matters, it really matters.
Oh
So
yeah.
I think it's fine. It's not one of those cards that I'm going to be looking for specifically in my deck, but I'm not unhappy if I see it.
Yeah, and I feel like it's a card that just has to be on a good base creature because, like,
Exactly.
I don't necessarily want to have like a toxic tactician,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I really enjoy having like a toxic basher because it has breakthrough, so you don't feel
Right.
as bad when you throw it in front of another creature. So that's
Right.
the thing where it's like you just want to have something that feels good when you block with it because otherwise, I don't like to block as often as a lot of other people might because it's just like you're not pushing damage, and if you're not
Hmm.
killing, it's like, is it worth it? So toxic kind of helps you finish off that creature, and that's really where I like it. But it is situationally good. It's
Hmm.
not as good as something like Spiky, in my opinion.
Right. And the fact that it doesn't scale very much as the levels go on, like -2,
Yeah,
-3, -4, again, it's really only going to clean up a creature
yeah,
more than anything. So I think I'd rather have Spiky in most situations, but it's okay.
yeah. I agree.
Yeah. All right, so that's the last of the Forge modifiers. So why don't we start talking about the spells? And we'll lead this off with our first Exalt. So let's talk about the Glow Hive Nursery. So the Glow Hive Nursery, it's an Exalt. It says deploy when you may play a Wisp minion. And the static text on it is when you play a minion in this lane, give it +2 attack and +2 health. So obvious play pattern, put this out, put the Wisp in the lane, you get a 4/4 Wisp. At level 2, it says you may play up to 2 Wisp minions, and when you play a minion in this lane, give it +4/+4. And then at level 5, or at level 3 rather, you get 3 Wisp minions, and the minion in that lane gets +6/+6. So, a couple things to note. This is the flavor of Exalt where it keeps all 3 levels as you play them. You don't destroy the previous level, which is sometimes the case with Exalts like this. But this has an ongoing effect on the board, and this is a great card for a minion-heavy deck, or a
Yes,
deck
it
that
is.
relies on minions a lot. And I have a deck that I just this is a very important card in that deck. If you've heard
Oh
about
yeah.
my factory deck, this is one of my favorite cards in the factory deck. The cool thing is you don't have to put the Wisp in the lane that the Glow Hive Nursery is in. So there will be situations where you want to play it and you don't want the Wisp in that lane necessarily. Maybe you want to put it somewhere else to chump, or maybe you're like, oh, I'll play this and get the Wisp somewhere else, and they'll be like, why are you doing that? Because I want to put a Brute in this lane, and have an 8/8 Brute instead of a
Exactly.
4/4 Wisp, right? So it affects all minions, which is really cool, and it pumps out a lot of stats. If you do the math and you get all the Wisps in it, at level 1 you get 8 stats total. So it's a little bit below the 12 stats you'd get from a creature. At level 2, though, if you get both Wisps in the lanes, you're getting 20 stats total, which is a couple above parity, which is normally 18. But at level 3, you get 36 stats on the board from the one play. And you're filling up all your lanes, and yeah, I mean, the creatures are not huge, but the ongoing value that you can get out of this as the game progresses is big. Um,
Oh yeah.
I love this card. I'm very happy to see this in a deck that relies on minions. If it's my only minion card, it's kind of lackluster. But if I have a decent um, sort of threshold of minions in my deck, I love this card. What about you, Sam? Have you played with it?
Yeah. So this is actually probably one of my favorite cards in the set. I think that it was one of those cards that is like subtly feels like it's underpowered when you look at it the first time. Where it's just like, all right, minions, you buff them. Like I didn't actually realize the first time I looked at the card that they all stayed on the field
Hmm.
because like once I kind of realized that, I'm like, wow, this card is incredible. Because like you said, you get a lot of stats, but like my whole thing was, all right, how much minion generation and minion buff can I put together with this? And like I have like Glowhive Nursery with like a biologist, and then if you can, so I actually have a couple of Betrayer Glowhive Nurseries, and it's
Oh,
like I play those with like Elysian Rain and a biologist and a Relentless Wanderers all in the same deck, and it's like those feel incredible because of the fact that it's just like you keep getting so much value. Like if you could play a Glow Hive Nursery into Elysian Rain and just get that additional stat buff, it just
yeah.
makes you feel so good, and it's really hard to play against. Um, it's one of those cards that I think is just like it almost gives you too much, in my opinion,
Hmm.
because there's no downside to the card at all, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think there's any downside to it. Other than level 1, it is an understated drop. Like you may not be able to play it for tempo reasons, but
That is true.
if your deck is built around minions, this is a very good card to have and to
Yeah,
prioritize for sure.
I do. I do think this is probably one of the reasons that they didn't put tricks into this set. Because obviously the whole
Yes.
Mad Lad combo is one thing, and like I know you spoke about Alolan, and there's a lot of really good Alolan cards,
Hmm.
but then I think Glowhive Nursery would have put it over the top. Like the
Yes.
fact that you can still pair this with Drix decks from set one, like I also feel like that's something I've not tried, but I really want to now that I'm actually
Yeah.
saying this out loud. But it's like I feel like they can't have this Strix, Lycian Rain, and all those cards all in one deck because I feel like that would have been too much.
Yeah. I've had a lot of luck with this with Centetta's Lab too. Like
Oh, I
just
bet.
throwing them in because the nice thing about that is you get the gizmos, but you give them a buff that lets them survive splash damage, like little
Yeah.
like ice, like getting splashed out by an ice storm or like a sparking omni can't take it out. So it's just like it's nice to be able to give a buff to those gizmos so they can really benefit what you want to benefit with them without them getting splashed.
Yeah, and like you said, the fact that you can put the Wisp in any lane is really, I think, one of the best parts here because it's
Yeah.
like you don't have to put it in the lane with the Glowhive, which again was something after seeing Thunder Crash
Hmm.
field. It's something that I assumed that I just had to play it in this lane, and
Yeah.
then as soon as I noticed, like, and I read the card again, I was just like, wow, like this card is really strong.
Yeah, this definitely has that advantage over Thunder Crash Field where you that's one thing I don't like about Thunder Crash Field is that you have to put the sprite in the lane.
Yeah,
Whereas this has a lot of flexibility, and this is also really good with something like an Apocamancer, where you can just dump all three wisps. It's kind of like does the same thing as Lycian Rain in that regard, where you can just put them all in the same lane and get those Apocamancer triggers. So
yeah,
yeah, a lot. I can't say enough good things about this card. I think it's really
yeah.
really
Me
strong.
neither.
Yeah. Let's talk about Heart Tree.
Yeah, so Heart Tree is in a spell as well, and it's an Exalt, obviously. So as deploy, give a creature +3 health, and then when you gain life, you may give a creature in this lane +3 health. At level 2, it has deploy, destroy your level 1 Heart Tree. So again, this is an Exalt, just like the ones that, or unlike Glowhive Nursery, where it doesn't get all your Heart Trees, you could only have one on the field at a time. So you destroy your level 1 Heart Tree, give a creature +6 health. When you gain health, you may give a creature in this lane +6. And then finally, the level 3 Heart Tree has destroy your level 1 and 2 Heart Tree to give a creature +10 health. Or not to give a creature +10 health, it's separate sentences, so you don't have to destroy them. But it just makes sure they don't stay on the board. And then when you gain health, you may give a creature in this lane +10 health.
Hmm.
So this is a card that I've actually seen in a couple decks be perform like a lot better than I expected.
Hmm.
So again, something like Dark Heart is really nice here because if you play a Dark Heart into a Heart Tree lane, it's just you gain life, give it a bunch of health, and then it just sticks on forever.
Yeah.
But I've also seen this in a deck with Glorf Glob that was
Oh
just like
gosh.
basically they were heart treeing other creatures to then play a Glorf Glob and then like make it huge. And
Okay.
it was just like one of those things where I saw that happen the first time and I'm like, wow, I need to see how many heart tree decks I have that are good
Yeah.
because it's just yeah, it's really fun. But what do you think?
Yeah, I've been looking for like a really good Heart Tree deck. I have yet to find a really good one that has enough sort of internal life gain payoffs. But this is great with Dark Heart Sorcerer because again the way the batching works when you play it, it's gonna be in the Dark Heart lane by the time the Dark Heart trigger goes off. So it's gonna get both the deploy bonus and the when you gain life bonus off of it. So it's immediately +6 to a Dark Heart, and then if it's in a Dark Heart lane, that Dark Heart is just going to keep growing and growing and growing. So I really do like it in that regard. And it's also kind of interesting. You can do some pretty interesting things with it if you have a Dark Heart that you wouldn't expect because of the way you can stack the triggers. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, if you stack the trigger of the Dark Heart resolving before the deploy ability, you can get the plus health bonus in all the Heart Tree lanes because
Ooh.
it'll see the health gain before the deploy destroys the first one. So, for example, you have a Heart Tree in a lane with a Dark Heart Sorcerer level 1. Then you play Heart Tree level 2, and you resolve the Dark Heart's ability before you resolve the deploy ability, and you get the +6 bonus in the lane and the +3 bonus in the Dark Heart lane. So that's probably convoluted and confusing, but there's some really tricky things you can do with this with Dark Heart. I love this with Shardplate Behemoth because it just gives such a high amount of health in very big chunks.
Oh yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah. So if you can get Darkheart and this and a Shardblade Behemoth working together, it can be really strong. Again, the one thing that it sort of suffers from is the hard removal, right? The Dreadbolt and the Botanimate and stuff like that, or even suppressing, redact, those kinds of things, because it doesn't help with attack. but it can make certain decks can just have a lot of trouble getting a creature off the board if you have ways to constantly trigger the life gain.
Oh, yeah, and
So,
actually, now that you mentioned it, I was looking at my collection. I do have a Betrayer Dark Heart Sorcerer that has a Heart Tree in it, and I do not know why
oh,
I've never played this deck. I just kind of scanned it in, put it to the side. I'm like, I'll play this one day. So
okay.
that might be my next deck that I build
I
because
want to
that
see
sounds like
that.
a
Yeah,
yeah. I'll send you the link as soon as this is done.
yeah, yeah. It's fun talking to you because you have so many cards, like so many decks that you've seen all these combinations that I've only dreamed of. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I definitely am spoiled. It's one of those things where I realize when I open packs, it's like I just kind of scan through them real quick. So I'm just like, wow, like I have so many. And then I look back. So actually, right here behind me, I've got like a screen, and behind me is just probably like 10 to 12, like 5 row boxes filled with decks.
yeah.
So I just had to cover it up so I looked a little clean.
Awesome. Well, so yeah, so Heartree, it's again, it's situational. It's a fun build around for sure. But then any build like any other build around, if you don't draw it, it doesn't. You don't want to build your whole deck around it. But I like it, especially with the Behemoth with Dark Heart Sorcerer, and I'm sure there's plenty of other applications
Yeah.
you can find.
Carnivorous Taro is another one I really like with it.
Yeah, Taro. Yeah, for sure, for sure. All right, what's our next spell?
Yeah, the next spell is Patriarch's Binding. So at level 1, you can choose to play a Gizmo minion, play a Mindless Zombie minion, play a Spell Sprite minion, and play a Wisp minion. At level 2, Patriarch's Binding has choose 1, play a Mega Gizmo minion, play a Zombie Brute minion, play a Spellstorm minion, or play an Oakfather minion. And at level 3, Patriarch's Binding has choose 2, play a Mega Gizmo minion, play a Zombie Brute minion, play a Spellstorm minion, and play an Oakfather minion. So this is a card that I think, first of all, just from flavor alone, the fact that you could play minions from other factions, I think the first time I saw this card, I was like, wow. Like, I feel like
Yeah,
this is probably hinting at something in the story because, like, there's not many other things that let you play cross faction minions.
yeah,
Um, really, I think Nyx's ability is the only one I could think of off the top of my head.
yeah. Nyx has the
So,
ability that can do that. Yeah,
yeah, but at the end of the day, just at level 1, it's a really strong card to play because it's like getting 2 minions and also getting to kind of pick which one. So like a lot of times when I play it, I tend to pick Gizmo and Spell Sprite, just
hmm,
because you'll get buffs on the Spell Sprite and also be able to get a Gizmo that you could then replace.
yeah,
But the fact that you have so much flexibility at level 1, and then immediately at level 2, you can play one of the level 2 minions. So it just feels really nice to be able to play an Oakfather or play a Spellstorm, which are
hmm,
the two, or actually even Mega Gizmo too. So situationally, depending on what you have, it's just you can really do a lot. Like if you want breakthrough, you get breakthrough. If you want to buff a creature,
hmm.
you can buff a creature. So it's a really strong card. And then when you get to level 3, being able to pick 2 of them, it's one of those cards where it's just like it's almost like a summoning council, but you only get one Oakfather and something else. Level
Yeah,
3.
yeah. I was going to ask you about what your thoughts are of this compared to Summoning Council. So this seems to kind of replace that.
I think because level 2 only gets you one body, that's where it kind of has a little bit of a drawback.
Hmm,
Also at Summoning Council, the fact that you get 2 Oak Fathers, that extra breakthrough and the extra stats tend to be really strong.
hmm.
So I think between the two, off like not seeing the rest of the deck, I probably want a Summoning Council.
Right.
That being said, depending on the deck that I'm playing, depending on the pairing I'm playing, if I'm playing something with zombie synergy, it's really nice to have. If I'm playing something where I care about elementals, being able to make that spell sprite
Hmm.
off level 1 is really nice to have. So it's like I think a lot of it, if I had to pick between the two, would be based off of the fuse that I'm making.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting too the level two being able all of the like Mega Gizmos and Spell Swarms do not show up that often at level two
Yeah.
on level two cards. So I think that's actually kind of interesting. I don't. Again, I don't like the fact that you only get one body out of the level
Yeah.
two. That's a bit of a downside, but you do get a couple of options for these minions that don't show up that often at a cycle two card. Um, and
What I
yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say you might be thinking the same thing, so I'll let you say what you were gonna say first.
Oh, I don't remember what I was gonna say. You go for it.
Oh, so I was gonna say with the level 3, the first time I saw someone make the Mega Gizmo and then immediately replace it with the Oakfather, it blew my mind because I
Yes.
wasn't thinking about the fact that you could like play replace. So then someone made that 14/14 Oakfather right off the bat, and I was just like, "What? Like I'm gonna
Yeah.
die now."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the nice thing too is that the gizmo always comes out first based on the order that they do it in. And I think with these choose cards, that you do them in the order of the
Oh,
blitz.
interesting. It
Uh,
makes sense because that's
yeah,
how you do it in a lot of other games.
yeah, because like Elementalist Ritual, you do the damage increase before you do the damage, that kind of stuff. So you always get that gizmo first, so they templated it correctly, and you can buff up whatever you're putting on top of the gizmo, which is really cool.
Makes sense.
So, but yeah, it has a lot of applications. Your mileage will vary depending on what you're putting it with, but it's a very cool card. I'm sad it's a rare and not a common because I think it could have been just fine as a common.
I agree, but maybe they tested it and found that just
It's a
if
little
it
too
showed up
much.
too often, they
Yeah,
might have been able to get too much power. Or maybe it was just one of those things they wanted to be special
that's
and they
fair.
didn't want it to show up as often. Because sometimes rares and above tend to be rare because they just want them to be special or
Yeah,
just not show up as much in sealed.
for sure, for sure. All right, what's our next spell? You got the Spiked Carapace. So this is just a plain old spell. It reads, give a creature +3 attack and +3 health. And then if you play this on a dinosaur, you give all of your creatures +2 armor this turn. That buff goes up to 6/6 at level 2 with 3 armor if it's a dinosaur for all your creatures. And then at level 3, it's a +10/+10 and 4 armor for all your creatures on a dinosaur if it's played on a dinosaur.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's fine. I mean, it's kind of like any other Uterra buff spell. The progression 3/3 6/6 10/10. I think it's the same progression as Druid's Chant, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it's slightly different. Uh, you want to put on a dinosaur if you can, so to get that extra little armor buff. But I'm not the biggest fan of temporary armor, especially at this dinky amount. Like 2, 3, and 4 is not a lot. I mean, it is definitely enough to like swing combat. I'm not gonna discount that,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not a game-breaking amount of armor. And again, putting a buff on a creature is asking for a blowout with like a Dreadbolt or a Botanimate or some other thing that can just take out one target pretty easily. But I think it's fine. I mean, it's a common. I don't expect there to be a lot to get out of it. Have you had a lot of experience playing with it? I think it's kind of like a good sealed
So,
card.
yeah, it's definitely a good sealed card, and it's actually I feel like there was one game where I was playing against it, and because I don't see it often, I really wasn't thinking about the second part of the ability, and I feel like one time I lined up combat, they played it on a dinosaur, and I was like, this is a blowout. Like,
Yeah.
I just completely shot myself in the foot. Um, I do feel like it almost kind of reminds me a little bit of Scipion Augmentation, just for the sake of if you played it on a dinosaur, give it the armor. It almost feels
Right.
like a little bit of like a reverse off of like the original one, which gives armor and then damage if you have a
Yeah.
mage. So it's like I wish it said if you had a dinosaur instead of if you played this on the dinosaur, just
Right.
to kind of because I feel like it would be a little bit more useful that way. And maybe they might have had it that way and they found it was too strong because being able to buff any of the creatures and then
Mm-hmm.
give everything armor on that turn when you're playing an aggressive deck might have just been too strong. But
Right. It's
yeah,
definitely good with something like Thundersoar too, because the
yeah,
armor helps keep it from, you know, helps with the attack bonus. So
yeah, and giving a Thunderstar +10/+10 when it already has breakthrough and a high
yeah,
defense that would
yeah,
be pretty wild.
yeah, for sure. But yeah, so Spike Case, okay. If you have it and it's kind of one of those situational cards where it'll be situationally good, but not a card you're gonna seek out specifically or build a deck around for sure.
Yeah,
What about Spirit Charm? What's your thoughts on Spirit Charm?
yeah. So Spirit Charm, it's a spell, and choose one, and then if you have a Spirit in play, choose two instead, and it's the same like that through all three levels. So the three abilities here are give a creature +4 health, exhaust a creature and it gains defender this turn, and then deal 5 damage to an exhausted creature. At level 2, the three abilities are give a creature +6 health, exhaust a creature and it gains defender this turn, and then deal 7 damage to an exhausted creature. Then finally, at level 3, you can give a creature +10 health, exhaust a creature and it gains defender this turn, and deal 12 damage to an exhausted creature. So I've found that I've never actually played Spirit Charm, and I've actually never had it played against me either.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it's something that people just avoided if it's in their deck. Being said, being able to give a creature defender, exhaust it, and deal damage to the exhausted creature can kind of be nice if you're playing against a deck where they have creatures that care if the creature is not
Mm-hmm.
exhausted. Because, like, for example, let's say they've activated a Blight Witch, and then they have another card that you'd like to give defender. You can deal damage to their exhausted Blight Witch and be able to give another creature defender. So it's like maybe this is a card because it cares about spirits will be a lot better next set
Hmm.
when there's a lot of spirit synergy. But I've just never had it benefit me. I feel like out of all the charms, it's probably the one that I like the least myself.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna second that. I think this is probably the weakest of all the these sort of pick two cards where it cares about a
Mhm.
certain creature type in play. Um, for reference, there's only four spirits in Whitefang aside from Wisps and Oak Fathers, which brings it up to like 6 point something if you count it that way. Um, and two of the spirits are soul binds. So two of those four spirits are soul binds. So it's very rare to get more than one or two spirit in the deck with the spirit charm, and even like having a lot of there's not a lot of ways to generate spirits either.
Yeah.
I think like Druid, like they took Mystical out of Battle for Whitefang Pass as far as the modifier goes, and there's a few different like the Glowhive Nursery and Patriarch's Binding that make minions, but there's just not a lot of minion generation to
Mhm.
make those spirits. So it's hard to proc both, and if you're not hitting both, it's really really weak.
Yeah.
Um, the fact that you can't damage a creature unless it's exhausted, uh, it becomes a very bad lightning spark, right?
Yep.
If +4 health is not a lot, and exhausting a creature and giving it defender is situationally helpful, but you're really just like spending action to prevent damage to yourself sometimes, maybe, or turn off an ability for a turn. That's a lot of action equity for not
I
a big
agree.
payoff. So having to jump through that hoop of having a spirit on the board to exhaust and do 12 to a creature when I could just have something like a disintegrate or an isolate or just a direct damage spell that doesn't
Mhm.
have a hoop to jump through. It's a very lackluster card in my opinion. It doesn't do enough to the board. You might get a 2 for 1 out of it
Mhm.
every 10 games maybe. Right, like it's just not going to
Yeah.
line up the way you want it to. I just think it's not. I think they kind of missed the mark on the numbers on it. But maybe if I
So
play with
the
it more, it'll be proof
So the one
wrong.
thing I actually just realized as we were talking though, it says exhaust a creature and the king's defender this turn.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be an enemy creature, so you could use it to save one of your own creatures in like an off forge turn, where if you play a creature, you have something in the front, they have other stuff in the back that they use to block it. You could then exhaust your creature and give it defender so it doesn't fight if you have two creatures in the back row.
Hmm.
So it's like, granted, do I want to play a spell that does that? Like, no.
No.
Like the additional defense is probably going to do it, but
Right.
like if you have something that cares about living through the cycle and you really want that ability to go off, like I guess technically you might be able to use that second ability in your favor by doing it to your own creature,
Right.
but at the end of the day it's like, is that really going to help me? Like,
Yeah.
probably not.
I think its best application is if you can hit mode 1 and mode 3. Like if you can have a creature where they already have an exhausted creature and you can give the stat bonus to save
Yeah.
one of your creatures and then you get kind of a 2 for 1 that way. I think that's probably the best case scenario with this card.
Hmm.
But I feel like practically speaking, the most likely is that you have to choose 2 and 3 to get a creature off the board, and then it's just kind of an underpowered removal spell.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. All right. What we got next? Twin Strength. Let's talk about Twin
Yeah.
Strength. So, Twin Strength reads give up to 2 different creatures +2/+2. That's level 1. It goes up to +4/+4 to 2 different creatures again, and then +8/+8 for 2 different creatures. It's fine. It's a buff spell. It's got a slightly better stat progression than a Ferocious Roar if you're only worrying about 2 creatures. But as soon as you get 3 or more creatures, Ferocious Roar is just better.
Hmm.
Um, it's kind of, again, this is one of those cards that I will play it if I have a full board and don't want to play a creature. I just want to buff a couple creatures. Or if it's going to help save a couple creatures in a combat, that's fine too. But, it's just a combat trick, essentially. What are your thoughts? Have you played it much?
I found like you said, it's kind of for a buff, it's kind of underwhelming. Like good thing it's like I guess a common versus a rare.
Hmm.
Although that being said, like the fact that it could hit multiple different creatures, like I guess it's okay with something like a Thunder Crash field where you want to be able to buff your stuff and
Hmm.
deal damage. But that being said, I would almost rather have Ferocious Roar in most cases, just because it hits more than two creatures.
Right.
I feel like I've never been upset when people have played this against me. I'm usually like relieved they played this instead of another card in their deck.
Yeah. Yeah. for sure. Yeah, there's not a lot to talk about. There's not, it's not that complicated a card. It's just you play it when if it's gonna, you know, blow out your opponent, or you just kind of ignore it and play something better.
Mm-hmm.
All right, what about the Uterra Nest? We got another Exalt here.
Yeah, so the Uterra Nest is an Exalt with deploy, give a creature +3/+3. When you play a dinosaur in this lane, give it +3/+3, then destroy this. At level 2, Uterra Nest has deploy, give a creature +4/+4. When you play a dinosaur in this lane, give it and creatures adjacent to it +3/+3, then destroy this. Then finally, at level 3, Uterra Nest says deploy, give a creature +6/+6. When you play a dinosaur in this lane, give all of your creatures +3/+3, then destroy this. So honestly, when I've played this card, it kind of feels like an Asperian Steel Plate, where you don't have to necessarily replace one of your cards. It's nice that you could deploy and immediately buff one of your creatures, and then if it's in a deck with dinosaurs, which you'll have at least one, you could kind of then get additional benefit by playing a dinosaur in that lane. It's usually a card that like I don't feel bad about because the stat bonus off the bat is just pretty solid, like +2/+2. Or sorry, +3/+3, +4/+4, and then what was the level 3 again? Is it +6/+6?
Yeah.
So it's like my stat bonus there. Like you don't feel bad. Like if the card just said those 3 stat bonuses as a spell, I'll be like, okay, whatever. But the fact that you could then get the additional stat bonus of like giving your adjacent creatures +3/+3, or all of your creatures +3/+3 if you play a dino, it's just really strong. And for cards that care about Exalted, I think in the next set you could play in a non-dinosaur in that lane and have it stay around, and then eventually when you need to play a dinosaur in that lane to buff it. But it's nice that you could destroy it when you want to, and you could leave it on the board when you want to. So if you have cards that care about having Exalt out, you leave it, and if you want to get the stat buff, you replace it.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting one. Again, the initial stat buff is not that exciting. It's it's enough to mess with combat, but it's not a huge impact. It actually, the curve on it's pretty low, 3, 4,
That's
6.
a good point.
But the potential with the dinosaur thing is really, really strong, and the fact that you have not complete, but most control over when to trigger it is very important, and that's what makes it strong. You don't have, just because you have a dinosaur, you don't have to put the dinosaur in that lane if you don't want to pop it right then. The fact that at the higher levels it's not just giving the dinosaur but also adjacent or all of your creatures that bonus is huge. It's like a mini Ferocious Roar, or like you said, Asperian Steel Plate. It does the same thing, but it's not costing you a creature. You're cashing in this thing that's just kind of waiting. It also sort of puts your opponent to the test of, well, what happens if they put a dinosaur in this lane? At level 1, that's, okay, the dinosaur gets bonus, but like at level 3, it's like, well, I have to be cognizant of what happens if suddenly their whole team gets 3/3 and they put a creature on the board at the same time. I think it's a lot stronger than it looks, but you have to find a good point in time to play it. So
I agree.
That's the hard part, is that you don't get a lot of stat bonus out of it, so you have to be careful with your tempo of when you play it.
And this was a card I actually really like with Mystic Megatha. So this is one of those Exalts I've found shows up in a lot of my Megatha decks.
Oh, okay.
So it's like, basically you could buff the Megatha by playing this in a different lane to then get the trigger off the enter ability of the Exalt to buff it again. And then if you play a dinosaur immediately after, you're going to have Breakthrough right away. So it's like, I found that little kind of combo of 2 cards is nice, and I've only done that in Sealed, but it's something that I would consider doing if I have a well-optimized deck and constructed.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that is our last... Oh, no, we got one more. Spell. All right, we got the Venom Chalice. Let's talk about Venom Chalice. You want to take this one, Sam?
Sure. Yeah, so Venom Chalice, it's a spell and an Exalt. It has deploy, give a creature -3 health. And then when you play a creature in this lane, give it +3 health, then destroy this. At level 2, Venom Chalice has deploy, give a creature -6 health. When you play a creature in this lane, give it +6 health, then destroy this. Then finally, Venom Chalice has deploy, give a creature -9 health, and then when you play a creature in this lane, give it +9 health, and destroy this. This is kind of similar to the Uterra Nest with the whole, when you play a creature in this lane, destroy it, so you can kind of control it when you want to. Venom Chalice is a card that I initially was just like, okay, and then the more I've played it, the more I actually seem to respect it, because it's like, again, it's kind of like a Toxic Spores in the sake of, being able to give a negative buff to your opponent's health and then give a positive buff to your own creature's health. But the fact that you could then leave it on the field and save it for later
Mhm.
is the part that's really nice. So it's just you play it in a lane where you know, like, hey, I might have a dark heart coming out soon, and then you could just drop the dark heart in that lane and make it stick more. Or if you
Yeah.
have like a Brashful creature, I've actually really enjoyed playing the Venom Chalice with Brashful because you
Yeah.
have the stat debuff. So then you could basically kill something or get it much lower in attack, and then you play your Brashful creature in your Venom Chalice lane. So it's like if they kind of don't completely keep that blocked,
Hmm.
then they're gonna potentially get punished. So this is a card I actually like a lot because it's removal and a buff, and you don't have to give it a minus in the lane. So it's like the first
Right.
time I read it, I thought I had to give it to the opposing creature, but the fact that it could be any creature on the board is really nice.
Yeah, that's what makes this thing versatile. Uh, and it does, it basically replaced toxic spores from alpha.
Yeah.
But I think I kind of like the delayed nature of it,
Hmm.
because toxic spores by itself, it's hard to line up where the giving the bonus health and giving the other creature minus health is going to in that moment make a big difference. But the fact that you have control over when the plus health is triggered seems to be a little bit more important. Like I can't tell you the number of times like where I've had toxic spores and I don't have a creature on the board to buff, but I have to get I have to finish off that blight wish now, right?
Yep.
I can't let them activate it,
Exactly.
but I don't have a creature on board, so this is nice that you get that sort of delayed effect. But
Yeah, and I've actually seen a couple people pair Venom Chalice with Uterra Charger. So it's like you play kill something and then you follow up by playing Uterra Charger
hmm
in that lane, buff the toughness, and then kill something.
that's
So it's
cool.
like that is like actually a really cool combo that I've seen and I've been like, wow, like I need to
Yeah,
see if I have any decks with those two together.
for sure. Now I have to look for that too.
Yeah, it's really strong.
Yeah. Well, that's the last of our spells. So let's go ahead and move into the soul binds. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah. All right. So the soul binds are the new thing for Battle for Whitefang Pass. Essentially, they are cards that come with their own paired card from outside the game. It basically takes the minion slot in your booster or in your half deck slot booster, and we'll start off with the Echo Wolves. So Echo Wolves at level 1, it's a 2/3 creature that says deploy. You may play an Echo Pup. I bet you're wondering what an Echo Pup is. An Echo Pup is also a 2/3 creature. It's a beast spirit, just like the uh, Echo Wolves. At level 2, you get a 5/9 that brings out a Echo Alpha. So Echo Alpha is also a 5/9. Hey, how about that? And then at level 3, it gets really fun. It says it's a 9/12 that reads deploy. You may play Echo Alpha. Then you may reanimate any number of Echo Wolves. So what does that translate to? Essentially, when you play the Echo Wolf at level 3, you get a 9/12, two 5/9s, and a 2/3. Uh, One thing to note is that even though with the pup you can play, or with the level 1 Echo Wolf you can play a pup, you can only play one side of the Soulbind. So at
Mhm.
most you're going to get 4 creatures out of this. But if you add up all those stats together, by the time you get to level 3, it's like a plus 27 stats worth of
Yeah,
stats on the board. Even at
that's
level
insane.
2, it's plus 10 worth of stats. It's a lot of stats in a creature uh, spread out across your board. So I have enjoyed this card. I think it's really good in decks that have like shambling as a big part of your mechanic, or sacrifice synergies, because of getting those extra bodies and bodies that are going to reanimate later in the game, right? It's so those are the two places I found them to be really strong. But what's been your experience with Echo Wolves? Have you played it much?
Yeah, so I haven't played it on my side, but I've played against it a bunch,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like it's a card with just the amount of buys it puts out, and like you said, with the amount of like stats that it throws, it's really strong. Like it's a card that I'm just like, oh no,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just it favorably blocks. It also is something where it's like you play it and you're getting two bodies at least every time, unless you already have the Echo Wolf or the Echo, or sorry, the Pup or the Alpha. But the big thing is you could just replace either of them with the Echo Wolves to then make sure you get a new one.
Right.
So it's like you're basically going to be able to reset your whichever pup or alpha you have if you want to get the bigger one out if you don't have the other one out. So it's like there's a lot of ways to trick the board, or not trick the board, but work around it,
Mm-hmm.
um, to be able to really get a lot of benefit out of it. So
Yeah.
and the fact that it's both a beast and a spirit tends to synergize well with a lot of other cards. So you'll see
Yes.
Patron, you'll see like I forget the name of the charm that's in per Necrom, the one that cares about having beasts.
The
But
Dark Shaper Ritual, yeah.
yeah, so if you pair it with a Dark Shaper ritual, it's just being able to trigger that too is really nice. So it's just you can trigger either of the charms, Spirit Charm or Dark Shaper ritual, off of this one card. So
Yeah.
it's not bad. And isn't there also like a loop you could do if you have two Echo Wolves?
Yeah, so I will. You can reanimate any number of other Echo Wolves with it. So, like, if you have a Betrayer Echo Wolves, you
Hmm.
can essentially replace the. Since it lets you reanimate any number, I believe you can replace um, the level 3 version with the other level 3 version, and then that one brings. Because I don't think it cares about which faction the Echo Wolf is in.
Yeah.
Because of the way it's worded, you can bring it since it says any number and not just your Echo Wolves. Um, it lets you do some sort of like infinite loop where you can loop the two. You have to have something like an Apocalypser or like a Dryad or something that cares about having creatures come into play
Yeah.
for it to matter. But um,
It's
it's a
still just I guess
theoretical
it's cool
combo.
that it exists.
But then yeah, it's cool that it exists. But then you have to have two level 3 creatures all the way
It is
up, and
true.
it seems like a very like magical Christmas land to pull it off, but it's a cool idea for sure.
No, for sure. It's
Yeah,
definitely magical Christmas land. I definitely agree.
yeah. All right,
Um,
so let's see what our next soul bind is. Hive Mind Pact. So you want to talk about this one?
yeah, and do you happen to have the Discord minimized because it tells me the stream is paused on my end?
Oh,
There
sorry.
we go. Perfect. Oh, no worries. Great. So Hive Mind Pact is a spell that says at level 1, play Hive Husk. So Hive Husk, I assume, is the next one coming up. Yep, it's a 2/8 level 2 Soulbind. And it's got 3 armor and defender, and it's a beast. So then the level 2 Hive Husk, or Hive Mind Pact, says if Hive Husk is in play, you transform it. Otherwise, you can play Hive Husk and give it +4 health. So the transform side of Hive Husk is Living Hive. So it's an 8/12. When this gains health, you may give another creature -4 health. And then if you get to level 3 Hive Mind Pact, we have if Hive Husk is in play, transform it and give it +8 health. Otherwise, play Living Hive.
Mm-hmm.
So again, the fact that it has transform and give additional health, it immediately triggers that second ability where when you gain health, you could give something else -health. So it's kind of like removal and a sticky creature, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
an 8/12, so it's
Yeah.
pretty big in terms of sticking around. Um, this is another card I've seen people pair with Heart Tree that is
Oh.
pretty incredible if you could gain health, because you gain health, you give it additional health, and then you can kind of slowly pick off their creatures. So Living Hive is definitely a card that I like a lot. It's one that I didn't respect a lot when I
Mm-hmm.
initially saw it the first time, but it's just like the level 2 Hive Husk, if you could bring that back up, it's just like it sticks around because it's got
Yeah.
8 health and 3 armor and defender. So it's like it's going to block basically a full lane for a long time. And they're going to have to put a lot of effort into removing it. So it's like, and it's like with the 2 attack, it will slowly pick away at whatever creature opposes it.
Right.
So this is a card that I didn't respect initially that I think is a lot stronger than I think people give it credit for. So what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so I haven't played with it. I don't own one yet, and I haven't played against it too much. But I have, one that I have played against it. You're right. It sticks in the lane. You put it in front of a creature that has like 3 or 4 power, and it's just gonna stay there forever, slowly whittling away that creature. So you're basically telling your opponent, hey, you're gonna have to replace that creature and put something a little more power against this if you want to get off the board. And if you don't get it off the board, then you have that whole transform and give it extra health to
Hmm.
turn into removal. So you're kind of putting them on like a little bit of a time bomb there, right? Or like eventually you're gonna draw the level 2. If you don't get this thing off the board, they're gonna get a big creature with extra health, and yeah. So that said, it doesn't do a lot of damage on its own. It's a good for clogging a
Hmm.
lane, but the Hive Husk itself only has 8 attack. And
Hmm.
yeah, you can give it a lot of health, and you can probably. It depends. I think it depends on how much you can trigger it, right?
Yeah, I think
Uh,
that's the biggest thing.
yeah. Um, but it dies to removal, straight removal. So
That's very true.
it's hard to put a lot of eggs in one basket with it. But if you can get to stick around, yeah, for sure, it does do some stuff to the board. But
Yeah, and
like,
even if you just can pump it with like a pump spell that gives plus health,
yeah.
or you have a patron because it's a beast, it's like
Mhm.
there are ways, but it's like again, it's like you have to have a couple reliable ways to do it to really get the benefit. But
Yeah.
if you can slowly pick away their creatures and trigger it multiple times a turn, it's like it's a lot stronger than I gave it credit for the first time I saw it.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I don't think it's like a card you necessarily build your deck around, but it's a nice like it's a good piece. Like it has its role.
For sure.
But speaking of cards you would build your deck around, why don't we talk about Nuada Face Flourish? So Nuada Face Flourish is a 3/6 mage at level 1 that says deploy. Play Nuada's Garden. And this is a spell that's an exalt, and it says when the first time you gain health each turn, you may play a wisp minion in this lane. Then it reads activate if you have no empty lanes, transform this, and it replaces your creature in this lane. What does it replace it with? It replaces it with an Oak Guardian, which is a 10/10 breakthrough with when you gain health, you gain that +1 instead. So it supercharges your health gain payoffs. Since Nuada cares about health gain, at level 2, it becomes a 4/8 that whenever you play a creature in an empty lane, you get 2 health. And then it's a 6/12 that you get 4 health whenever you play a creature in an empty lane. So this is one of those cards. It's actually interesting. It actually seems like the Garden is sometimes better than the Oak Guardian. Like you might just want to keep the Garden out to just keep on bringing out these wisps over and over and over again.
Oh, for sure.
You know, it pairs really well with Shambling. You know, the wisp dies and immediately replaces itself because you get that Shambling proc. It only works once a turn. It's the first time each turn. But I think it's an interesting life gain payoff card. And again, like you only get to deploy this Exalt when you first play Nuada. Like the second and third level don't let you redeploy it, which is why you might be hesitant to bring out the Oak Guardian. But you know, conceivably, you can get a 10/10 level 3 creature in the first cycle if you can fill your lanes really quickly, which can be a pretty big threat. So there's kind of two ways you can go with this. You can go very grindy with like block that lane forever, get a wisp every turn kind of thing, or I'm going to just spam the lanes and get this massive Oak Guardian that is immune to Botanamates and Dreadbolts and tells you, like, kill this now. Or just keep taking 10 to the face over and over again. But what's your experience been with Nuada?
So it's a card that I feel like I've theory crafted more than I've played, and it's something that I feel like I have a couple Nuada decks that I really want to try, and I've just unfortunately not played them as much as I should. I think that the abilities on the level 2 and the level 3 are the ones that kind of have made me more excited, because I really want to pair Nuada with a Kindred card or with a Carnivorous Taro or something that will just kind of let me play other creatures in lanes and then really benefit off the fact that it's just like I'm going to gain like a couple life gain triggers this turn. That being said, I agree with you that it's like it's risky to want to flip your soulbind here, because at the end of the day, Nuada's Garden is pretty strong, where if you can have the Garden out with the level 2 Nuada, you could then just get a wisp every time you play it, and then so you gain life, get a wisp, play it in an empty lane, gain life again. So it's like that double life gain trigger, as long as Nuada's out, can probably be more beneficial than the extra buff of life that you get from the flip side of it, which is, what's the name of it again?
The Oak Guardian, yeah.
Oak Guardian, yeah. I will say that I think I've played against this maybe like once or twice, and I did see the Oak Guardian come out once, and then like the amount of life they've gained with the additional +1 was pretty backbreaking.
Okay.
So it was just like, yeah, it's just like I can't even remember what the deck had because it was so long ago, but it's just like they gained a lot, and then just I think they were gaining an extra 2 to 3 life a turn because of the fact that they were able to do it with the Oak Guardian.
Yeah.
So it's like Oak Guardian with Nuada is really nice.
Yeah. It definitely like begs to be paired with Necrium for sure. This is one of those cards that would like that.
I agree.
And I feel like this kind of replaced, like Nuada, I think kind of replaced Spring Dryad in a way. It's kind of got the similar when you play a creature, but the bonus is a bit better, I think. I mean, it does require it being an empty lane, so that's a little bit tricky, but yeah, I think it's just a nice, neat little package of a card that has a lot of different applications. And like you said, it's good to theory craft. I only have one deck with it, and I haven't played with it much, but I think I want to start experimenting with it a bit more.
For sure. Maybe I'll do that too. We both should see what we could build with it. And
yeah, for sure.
To kind of break it.
Yeah. But we've got just a couple more soul binds because every faction has 5. So let's see what comes up next. Do you want to talk about Ogam?
Sure, yeah. So Ogam Grovemaker is a 4/6 creature, and it's a plant spirit that has deploy, play instant grove. So instant grove is an exalt that has your creatures in this lane are also plants, and then activate if you have a creature with 15 health or more in this lane, transform this. When it transforms, it becomes illuminated grove, so your creatures in this lane are also plants. When one of your creatures in this lane gains health, give it that much attack. So then the level 2 Ogam is a 4/8 with deploy, give another plant plus 5 health. And then the level 3 Ogam is a 4/14 with activate, give another plant plus 5 health. So this is a card again that I saw played for the first time in a deck that had Glorf Glob, which I don't know why I tend to see these paired with Glorf Globs, but someone paired it with a Glorf Glob that got big, and then they were able to flip the instant grove. The biggest thing in a deck like this is you need other ways for your creatures to gain health in addition to being a plant. So I found actually that Carnivorous Taro is a really strong card with Ogam if you have life gain triggers, because it's a plant that will get the buff in addition to the fact that because you've gained life, it will likely flip your instant grove. I will say that I've played a couple games with Ogam, and even though its stats are -2, -6, and -9, they were strong enough where it tends to block pretty well. And also set up a board. So it's like it could tend to kill a lot of creatures that you kind of want to put it against. I've actually flipped Instant Grove quite a few times, which I wouldn't have expected. But as soon as it flips, like the thing is, like it's kind of got a little bit of a drawback until you flip your Instant Grove, and then it becomes insane.
Right.
Because it's just like at that point, like I've seen people play it on, like I'm trying to think what creatures it was. Like I know again one of them was Glorf Glob, where they gained the health off the Glorf Glob, and then like because it gained health, it gained additional attack, or something like Thundersoar. Like Thundersoar could actually kind of flip it almost immediately, and I've seen that as well. So you flip that, and then you immediately, if you could give it buffs to the health, which a lot of times you kind of want that to live, and if it's a plant and you could activate it over and over again, like buff the health and then give it additional attack. So I found that there are a couple just really cool synergies with Ogam, and it's a card again that I looked at the first time and I'm like, I'd rather have Nuada. And then I think that in the right deck, if you could flip that instant grove to an illuminated grove, it's just really good.
Right, yeah. I mean, I have this in a deck that also has a Krogius, so
that's a great one.
Level 2 Krogius will instant flip it as well. But the rest of the deck is kind of lackluster, so I haven't played it very much. But yeah, I mean, I think again, this is one of those cards that you have to have a certain density of ways of buffing health beyond the Ogam for it to really shine. And that's pretty much limited to Uterra giving plus health. Like, the other factions aren't very good at that. With the exception of things like Glorf Glob or creatures that self-buff themselves. I mean, I guess some Necreum, like you have commanding creatures to buff zombies or other things, but it doesn't. The Illuminated Grove doesn't do a lot unless you draw the Ogam to keep buffing that creature. So you really have to rely on what's in the Uterra deck, and if you don't have a good density of health buffing, you have to work really hard to make this guy work, I think.
So I will say Ogam with Shardplate Behemoth is also a combo that I love. Because if you can make it a plant in the lane with either the Illuminated Grove or I already forgot the name of the other side. Let me look that up real quick. It is the Instant Grove and Illuminated Grove. So if you play it in either, and then you play the Ogam level 2 or 3, you're basically able to just give it health off the deploy or the activate ability. So even though you don't care about giving it the power, just being able to again just buff the health on that, even if you don't have it flipped, is just really nice. And that's actually I think a combo that I have in one of my decks that actually was something that I used to flip it as well.
Right. Yeah, I can't remember if I have a Behemoth in that deck. I have to check. You're making me have to look up all these cards. I haven't seen to look up after this.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. But we got one more, and this is one that we've talked about earlier. Let's talk about the Shard King. Oops, that's not the Shard King. There's a Shard King. All right. So Shard King is a dinosaur. It's a 5/3 at level 1 with Breakthrough, and when you deploy it, you get the Shard Cavern. Shard Cavern reads your creatures in this lane have Breakthrough, so it's an exalt. And you activate if you have 15 or more attack on the creature in this lane, you get to transform it into the Surging Cavern. Still gives the creature breakthrough, but now whenever that creature deals damage to the enemy player, it deals an extra 3 damage. So supercharge that damage. But I think the big thing with this card is the breakthrough. Giving any creature breakthrough is big game. Let's talk about actually the other levels. So level 2, it becomes a 7/4 that when you deploy it, it gives your other creatures with breakthrough +5. So not just the one in the Shard Cavern lane, but also any other breakthrough guys you got. And then at level 3, it becomes an activate. So it's a 10/5 activate, give your other breakthrough creatures +5. So this can really dish out a lot of attack. Again, this is one of those cards that I don't have yet, so I might defer to you, Sam, on how this guy plays out, since I haven't played too much against him either.
So I will say that it feels incredible to play, and it's also really tough to play against. So the deck that I would think is the best showcase for this is Cardboard Newt has a deck that runs Nova Elementalist with Shard King.
Oh, yeah.
So basically they can get their Rumble Spark embodiment flipped over, and they could get it into a lane with the Shard Cavern, and then or not, and then they basically keep buffing it to give it breakthrough, and then eventually it's gonna get that +15 attack, and then it's just like so hard to deal with. It's like not only do you have to deal with the Rumble Spark, but now you have to deal with the breakthrough Rumble Spark. So that deck is really hard to play against, and it's one that is just I've struggled, and I think that is just like the epitome of, oh gosh, like I could give this other stuff breakthrough that really shouldn't have breakthrough.
Right.
But it's a card that like I have enjoyed playing it every time I've played it. It's just a card that you're okay underdropping because you could just drop to get the Surge Cavern. But in general, having a 5-power breakthrough at level 1 is just not bad in general.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, granted, it's gonna die. Like likely it dies almost every turn that you play it.
Yeah.
It's just the inevitability of Shard King. But the hope is that you have so many other threats on the board that they have to focus on killing the other things instead of your Shard King.
Right.
So then it just keeps dealing that incidental breakthrough damage.
Yeah, I mean, you sneeze on the Shard King and it dies, right? Like it'll a mindless zombie can take this out, and actually just about any level 2 minion will. Yeah, any level 2 minion is going to take it out because it has such a weak health. But you're not playing it for its body, its board presence. You're playing it for the Exalt and what it can do to the rest of your breakthrough creatures. Especially if you can get this in a deck with a number of bashful creatures, or stampeding, or oak fathers, that kind of stuff. It can really push a lot of damage, for sure. But yeah, I think it has a lot of interesting applications. I kind of want to see if there's a way to do a deck with that and trying to flip the Surging Cavern and using it with something like a Shambler to just throw a Shambler in the Surging Cavern lane and triple the damage essentially out of it.
Yeah. And also Vampiric too is nice.
Yeah, Vampiric, throw a Vampiric in there, or even if you're still doing it with Tempes, you get things like Acer Mecha Mage, or anything that can just deal direct damage to your opponent repeatedly. It can really buff that up, even if you're not doing it for the breakthrough. So it has some interesting applications, but if you're going down that route, it's gonna be a lot harder to get a 15-power creature to flip it in the first place. So you gotta be careful with how you do that, but.
For sure. I will say, though, I do have a deck with Shard King and Krogius, and it's just nice to be able to get the buff off of playing the Shard King into a Krogius if it happens.
Yeah.
I've had that actually happen before, and also Carnivorous Taro is another great card to have in a deck with a Shard King, because it's just like, if you could get some life gain in your purple half and you play it green-purple, you keep buffing the Taro up, and then you just give it breakthrough. It's just like, it's so hard to deal with. Or even if it's just a Kindred card instead of a Taro, although... It's just, there's a lot of really good green cards that you could have with it, and I actually have a few really strong Shard King decks that I need to definitely play more. But again, Cardboard Newt's deck, which has a Shard King and 2 Brashful creatures in it, it's really good, because it's just like, you buff them all. It's like, everything in your deck is either going to have breakthrough naturally, or you give one of the creatures breakthrough. It's a really good card.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, that wraps up our Soulbind, so that's the last of the cards. So why don't we bring it home? Let's talk a little bit. What's your overall impressions for Uterra in this set? Like, how do you feel it did compared to Alpha?
I feel like Alpha Uterra was really, really strong. I think that set 2 Uterra, even though it pulls back on the life gain, which is kind of where the set 1 sits, I think set 2 has a lot of really, really good cards that kind of like I'm still excited to play set 2 Uterra. Like it's something where it's like I want some of these really good Uterra cards from set 2, like your Shard Kings, like your Carnivorous Taros, like the Glowhive Nurseries. It's like there's just some cards that are so incredible that I'm just like, wow, like decks with those cards are insane.
Yeah, yeah. I think Uterra kind of broke even from
Hmm.
Alpha. I lost some really critical cards and debatably overpowered cards like the Mantis and Forge Seal and some of
That is true.
the particularly, I dare say, broken cards. But it got a lot of interesting cards and to come in as well, and some very powerful self-contained cards. It's got a pretty decent mix of soul binds. Like none of them are particularly weak. They all have sort of their niche playability, and like we saw some of the other factions previously, like Aloyan and Tempest, where there's some that were really good and some that were just like meh. I think Uterra kind of has a good mix of soul binds, where none of them are super powerful, but none of them are like unplayable essentially.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think they did okay. I don't think they got a lot of more. Like I don't think they got a big boost, but I also think they didn't really lose anything.
Mhm.
No.
What I will say is from a playability standpoint, if I'm playing a game for fun where I just want to like enjoy cards, enjoy abilities, I would pick set 2 Uterra versus set 1 Uterra almost any day. Because again,
Yes.
I feel like set 1 is so focused on life gain and kind of, again, like you mentioned, Forge Seal and Mantis and things like that. I think that between the two, I would have a lot more fun and there's a lot more creativity available for playing in set 2.
Yeah.
From a competitive standpoint, I feel like I would have to give the edge to set 1 because as soon as you mentioned Forge Seal and Mantis, I was just like, oh gosh, like if
Yeah.
I had to pick, if I'm going to play Uterra, likely I would want to play it with Forge Seal and Mantis if I'm going to be playing at like a top tier event. That being said, like you don't have to play every event at that level, and like
Exactly.
honestly, I'm kind of bored of my Forge Seal Mantis decks because I've
Right.
played them so often. But it's just I think that they did a good job making cards that are very exciting in set 2 that like I'm looking forward to branching out more into. Like there's cards still in set 2 in general that I'll see somebody play and I'll be like, this is the first time I've played against this ever. And it's
Yeah.
like, wow, why haven't I been playing this card? Like I mentioned Glorf Glob quite a few times, and I'm like, that's a card that I just completely overlooked. And granted, it's obviously not in Uterra, but it's just like I looked at it, I'm like, this is whatever. And then people played against me, and I'm like, that's fun. Like I kind
Yeah.
of want to build this.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Like especially what we thought about the competitive. I feel like Alpha Uterra was very linear. Like there
Yes,
was just a couple different strategies with it, and they were kind of on the rails in a sense. And either you high rolled your deck or you didn't.
exactly.
The algorithm got a bit of a pinch on it in set 2 where there's less synergy going on, but I think there's a lot more variety in what Uterra can do in set 2. So
I agree 100%.
yeah, what about your favorite card? What really stood out to you in terms of your favorite for Uterra coming in set 2?
So that's tough. I feel like definitely towards the top is Shard King. I think maybe it's a tie between Shard King and Glowhive Nursery.
Okay, yeah.
Because I played a lot of minion decks in the past, and like in my personal collection, I have a couple decks with Betrayer, Lycian Reigns, and Necrom that also have a Nyx that does like make a brute, make two brutes, and then play a zombie, give all your minions a buff.
Hmm.
So like being able to play those with Glowhive Nursery is so much fun to do. So like as soon as I played that card together with my Lycian Reigns, I was just like, I don't want to go back.
Yeah,
that
yeah,
being that being said, it's just Shard King is a very cool card that I think just makes some decks that were good great. And
yeah.
it's just yeah. So what are your thoughts? I'm
Yeah,
curious.
I had to give some serious props to Glowhive Nursery, but I think if I had to choose just one card, I think it has to be the Carnivorous Tarot. I think it's just such a neat, it's just a perfect little package, right? It
Hmm.
has that kindred effect that I really love from the first set, and it's still in the second set as well. But getting that just a little life gain, and automatically buffing itself and triggering other life gain synergies, so it really brings, if you're going for like a life gain package and it's you have a good life gain um, build of the Uterra, I just love how out of hand the Taro can get. And
Oh, for
the fact
sure.
that it's a rare and not a forged creature, I think it actually shows up a bit more often than Kindred would. Um,
That's a good point. That's actually a really good point.
yeah, and I like that it synergizes with things like the Sower. I think I have a deck with this. Yeah, I think that deck I was talking about had a Sower in it too. Had a
I
tar-
feel like it does because I remember playing against that deck and being like, "This is insane."
yeah, I
Like
have
I remember there was just
yeah, I've got a deck with a Taro, a Krogius, Kindred Bear, a Sower, and a Swamp Moss Lurker. And I have yet to find the perfect pair for it because it has no spells. It just has an a Betrayer Energy Surge in it. It's a really weird deck.
interesting.
But
You'll have
yeah,
to send me the link to that because I want to see that one in paper.
yeah, I'll have to send that to you after this. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think the Taro is kind of. I just like how neat of a package it is. I also like the art on it. I think the art's pretty cool. I don't know if I
yeah,
can find
I
it
agree with
quickly,
you
but
because I do have a deck that's got like two Kindreds and a Glowhive Siren with some life gain payoff in like set one, and I'm just like, man, if I could find a Betrayer like Carnivorous Taro that I
yeah,
could
that'd be
just somehow
cool.
pair with that, I was like, this would be absolutely incredible. Because I think it is one of the first cards that is, or it's the only card that really is Kindred outside of Uterra if you get a Betrayer. Because there's no way to get Betrayer as an ability outside
Exactly,
of
because
Uterra.
it's linked to Uterra. Yeah.
Yeah, and me as someone who I search for betrayers like crazy, like that's
Yeah.
kind of where I find my excitement in the game. It's like this is one of those cards where I'm like, I need to find a betrayer Taro eventually.
Well, I know where who to contact if I ever open one.
All right, sounds good.
If I can part with it.
That's true. Yeah, I would. The thing is, though, I know how much you love the card too, so like I kind of ask for that.
That's fair. That's fair. All right. Well, to the listeners, what do you guys think about Uterra? Do you agree or disagree with some of our assessments? Please give a comment in the links below, and we can start a little bit of discussion. And for Sam, where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me both on Twitch and YouTube. My username is Nathas Gaming, so Nathas Gaming. Yeah, so I do Twitch streams usually once every week, maybe once every a couple times a week, and then I'll usually post those on YouTube, and then I'll sometimes do like box openings, things like that on YouTube as well. So both locations you could find me.
Yeah, I always enjoy living vicariously through your box openings.
I will say I have a couple cases of Kickstarter boosters behind me that like I have been struggling not to open. Like every like
Yeah.
weekend, I'm like, man, what if I just do a stream and open like a full case of Kickstarter? And I'm just like, because I want to open it, but I was like, I'm kind of saving it for a rainy day and trying to like do sealed events locally. But like,
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's fun, but it's just like I also am like every time I open stuff now, I'm just like, where do I store it? That's one of the reasons why everything is still closed.
Yeah, yeah, and then when you find that perfect deck, you're gonna have to search through your whole collection to find it again.
Oh,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
But I will say, all these people opening stuff like Summoning Stitcher right now, I'm just like, man, I've got to open it so I could get the cool decks.
yeah, yeah, for sure. All right, well, I think that just about does us for our Uterra review. We will be wrapping this up with Necreum at a later date, and we will also do a little bit of a mini episode with the new Forgeborn abilities. So if you guys can enjoyed this episode, please give a like and subscribe to the channel for the next time one of these shows up, and we will catch you guys later.
Awesome, and thank you again for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Bye, guys.
See you later.